The story begins with a little snake being gnawed on by a group of piglets. Crunch, munch, chomp. With every bite, the snake's tail twitched. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. "Hey! Stop chewing on my tail, you little jerks!" With one swift motion, he coiled around one of the piglets and flung it into the distance, causing the rest of them to scramble away squealing. He glanced at his tail, which was covered with bite marks, and it really started to hurt. Yet strangely, he's still alive, causing him to wonder just what the heck is going on. He vividly remembered a human shattering his demon core, which he depended on for cultivation. Without it, his cultivation path was basically over. Thinking about his ruined future, he burst into tears, believing life was pretty much over for him. But hold on. Something isn't right here. Without his core, he should have died on the spot, but how is he still alive? Well, it's a long story. To get to the bottom of it, let little Snakey walk you through what happened, or maybe slither you through is more accurate. Anyway, let's rewind a couple of days to a human village. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the rooftops. Villagers bustled around, hurrying to get home. Things felt a little off. Someone was banging a drum on the stairs, shouting for everyone to keep their candles lit and seal their doors and windows tight. "Don't let that old black snake sneak into your house," the man warned. Judging by the villagers' conversations, it became clear that a few days ago, an old black snake had shown up at the mountain god temple and ate 2 people. One of them turned out to be a Taoist priest. While no one had been attacked since then, the villagers noticed their chickens and ducks had been vanishing at an alarming rate. Up on the mountain, a young boy and his father were out collecting herbs. On their way home, the boy suggested they bring their chickens and ducks indoors. He reasoned that even if it stinks, it's better than losing them. The father agreed. He clearly didn't want their livestock turning into snacks for the so-called big bad snake. But just as they finished talking, the father suddenly shivered. "Weird. Why is it so cold all of a sudden?" he muttered. Meanwhile, back at the crumbling temple, a large black snake slithered out of the shadows. Its dark scales practically disappeared into the dim surroundings. This snake, as it turned out, understood human speech and knew exactly who they were talking about. He wondered to himself if perhaps the old black snake they were talking about was referring to him. But honestly, he didn't think he was old, or that scary for that matter. Still, he couldn't deny the villagers had a point. After all, it was he who ate those 2 people by the temple a couple of days ago. But he was just doing them a favor. At least that's what the snake thought. A few days earlier, a desperate man had been running for his life, screaming for help, with an old Taoist priest hot on his heels. Apparently, this priest had been feeding the man all sorts of sketchy herbs and was planning to turn him into some kind of human elixir. The man managed to escape and bolted straight to the mountain god temple. Falling to his knees, he begged the mountain god for help, banging his head on the ground in pure desperation. Nearby, the snake overheard the commotion. Back then, he didn't understand human language, but he could feel the man's fear and pain. Feeling oddly sympathetic, he decided to help the poor guy by putting him out of his misery as quickly as possible. And one gulp later, the man's suffering was over. Before he could slither away, another human appeared and screamed, "No, my elixir!" For some reason, he also looked just as miserable and desperate as the first guy. He even started shouting at the snake, calling him all sorts of nasty names and demanding he spit out his precious human elixir. He didn't understand a word of it. Instead, he thought, well, since he really wanted to meet the previous guys, maybe he should help them reunite. And just like that, down the hatch the priest went. In his stomach, of course. Either way, it was a satisfying dinner. At least back then, he was feeling pretty pleased with himself. What he didn't know was that swallowing those 2 would change his life forever. Not long after, something strange started happening. A demon core began forming inside him, and with it came intelligence. For the first time, he could understand human language and think beyond basic instincts. It felt like his IQ was skyrocketing every second, or perhaps some geniuses were blessing him with some cosmic cheat code for brains. From that moment, the world looked entirely different. He noticed dangers he'd been blissfully ignorant of before, like the terrifying truth about humans. He learned about a group called the Snake Hunters, clad in black cloaks and ruthlessly hunting snakes like him. Turns out, they weren't just your average humans. They were cultivators from a sect specializing in hunting and killing his own kind. He even saw them take down a massive python once. The scene was so horrifying, and he almost jumped to his feet. Not that he had any. That's when he realized just how powerful humans could be. Cultivators, he learned, advanced through stages like chi refining, foundation establishment, core formation, and even the nascent soul stage. Looking back, he realized all his previous escapes had been pure dumb luck, or maybe ignorance combined with sheer recklessness. Now that he was so much smarter, he made a vow. From now on, he'd be extra cautious and do whatever it took to survive. Compared to the high risks of hunting big animals or humans, snatching poultry seemed like the safer route. As he mulled over this plan, his stomach let out a loud growl. Ugh, hungry again. He'd grown so big that a few chickens or ducks didn't cut it anymore. Plus, they were getting harder to steal these days. Then he remembered a rich family nearby. Surely they'd have some pigs. Just as he was about to try his luck, his eyes drifted to a mural on the wall, depicting a human story. Over the past few days, he'd noticed that humans loved naming things. Everyone called him Old Black Snake, which he didn't particularly like. But this mural inspired him. The story it told seemed fitting. It's a love story, and the snake inside is so lovely. So from today onwards, he decided to call himself Snaky. It sounded much cuter, didn't it? The scene then shifts to Chen Village, where everyone has gone to bed for the night. Little Snaky slithered his way toward the pigsty. When he arrived, his eyes gleamed at the sight of plump, snorting piglets inside. One of these would definitely fill him up. Carefully, he checked the human's house. No movement, no light. It seemed they were sound asleep. Perfect. Without hesitation, he darted into the pigsty and swallowed a pig in one gulp. The remaining pigs were clueless at first, but once they realized what had happened, they panicked, squealing and scrambling around in chaos. Little Snaky grew anxious. These noisy pigs are going to wake the humans! His gaze locked onto the loudest one of them all. If you're going to make the most noise, then you're next, he thought. With a flick of his tongue, he swallowed the noisy culprit too. Now his belly was round and full, almost uncomfortably so. Glancing down at himself, he realized he might have overdone it. Still, with several hours left before the humans woke up, he figured he had time for a quick nap to digest. Satisfied and sleepy, he coiled up right there in the pigsty, completely unbothered by the wide, frightened eyes of the remaining pigs. 2 hours later, a commotion jolted Snaky awake. Angry shouts and the sound of scuffling filled the air as a group of men dragged someone toward the pigsty. Realizing he'd gotten too comfortable, Snaky quickly slithered up a wooden pillar, hiding himself on the ceiling. The darkness worked in his favor, and the humans didn't notice him. From his perch, he watched as the men dumped a bloodied, lifeless man into the pigsty. The poor guy had clearly been beaten to death, but neither of them seemed to care. One of them even sneered, "This is what happens if you defy young Master Chu. Useless fools better off as pig feed." The two men, who weren't enjoying the stench of the pigsty, dropped the body and hurried off. As they walked away, one of them scratched his head, glancing back at the pigs. He looked suspicious, like he'd noticed there were fewer pigs than before. Maybe he was just imagining things. Once the coast was clear, Little Snaky cautiously poked his head down to get a closer look. The pigs, curious as ever, had already gathered around the body, sniffing and nudging it. Snaky wasn't sure if the man was truly dead or alive, but he remembered hearing that humans thought corpses brought bad luck. Best to slither away before things get messy. Just as he was about to leave, the man's eyes snapped open. Snaky flinched so hard he nearly fell off the beam. What the hell? How is he alive? The man coughed a couple of times, then started laughing, low at first, but it quickly grew into a triumphant roar. Finally! Finally! I, the immortal Chen Fan, have been reborn through possession. Snaky froze, utterly baffled, and wondered, what on earth is he talking about? The man stood up slowly, testing his limbs, and began stretching. He seemed surprised to know the body he was in was also called Chen Fan. Then, like a madman, he began rambling to himself about things that made no sense to Snaky. Something about breaking off an engagement, a crippled core, revenge, who even knows what else. Little Snaky tilted his head. Who's he talking to? There's no one else here. The man began inspecting his wounds, saying if it weren't for him taking over, this body would have been a goner. But either way, he will restore it soon enough. Meanwhile, Snaky clung tightly to the beam, hoping to stay unnoticed. But of course, the worst happened. The man turned and locked eyes with Snaky. For a moment, Snaky panicked. His mouth opened wide in shock. The man said he was immortal, but what does that even mean? Is he a human cultivator? To his surprise, the man didn't scream, run, or even flinch. Instead, he just sat down cross-legged, completely unfazed, like having a giant snake glaring at him was the most normal thing in the world. Then, in the most casual tone, the man said Snakey was just a spirit-level beast at the first level of enlightenment, which is not even worth his attention. The man ignored Snakey completely and began meditating. Soon, a faint golden glow surrounded him, and above his head, a mystical image of a dragon coiled around a cauldron appeared. His face lit up with excitement, overjoyed to see the demon god cauldron had followed him into his rebirth. Snakey, on the other hand, had no clue what was happening. All he saw was the man conjuring some strange energy, which could only mean one thing in his mind. He was about to be killed. He must have figured out I stole the pigs, and now he's going to punish me. The moment Snakey pictured himself skewered and roasted over an open flame, tears welled up in his eyes. Panicking, Snakey knew he didn't want to die here. What do I do? Give the pigs back? He glanced at his bloated belly. Too late for that. Most of them had already been digested. As the man's aura grew stronger, Snakey's panic deepened. He muttered to himself over and over, "What do I do? What do I do?" Finally, as the man boldly declared, "In this life, I will crush the entire world beneath my feet." Snakey made his decision. Without thinking, he opened his mouth wide and swallowed the man whole in one swift gulp. The man barely had time to grunt in surprise before disappearing down Snakey's throat. For a brief moment, Snakey felt triumphant. But he didn't get ahead of himself, knowing the noise had likely alerted the humans. He needed to get out of there, fast. Meanwhile, inside Snakey's stomach, Chen Fan was absolutely livid. Getting swallowed by a mere level 1 demonic beast made him feel humiliated. As he spoke, Chen Fan braced himself against the esophagus and began gathering energy. Snakey's victory was short-lived. A sudden, brutal strike from inside made him howl in pain. He couldn't believe the man was still alive, and how he was able to cast spells from inside him. Chen Fan didn't let up, launching a relentless barrage of attacks. Each blow sent shockwaves of agony through Snakey's body, making him writhe and scream in torment. Realizing he was in serious trouble, Snakey decided to activate his trump card, which is his demon core. But just as he was about to use it to protect himself, the man acted faster. He pushed inside Snakey's body and found the core before Snakey could react. Snakey whimpered, "Don't touch it, please don't touch it." But it was too late. Chen Fan's fingers wrapped around the core, and with one powerful yank, he shattered it into pieces. Pain like nothing Snakey had ever experienced ripped through him. He spat up blood, his body crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. "Ouchie! My demon core! It's gone!" Snakey's vision blurred with tears. Damn, snake hunters are too strong. His body was a wreck, his jaw impaled on a sharp tree branch, leaving him unable to move. He thought bitterly about how unfair it was, since he just gained intelligence and his life just barely getting started. Tears streamed from his eyes. If he'd known it would end like this, he'd never have stolen those piglets. Never. Inside Snakey's body, Chen Fan continued attacking him, even biting chunks of Snakey's flesh to replenish his blood energy. He mocked Snakey for being weak and fragile, but admitted he'd at least make a decent tonic. Just as it seemed Snakey's fate was sealed, something unexpected happened. Besides, the crushed demon core began to glow. Somehow, it broke free from Chen Fan's control. Chen Fan reached out desperately to reclaim it, but no matter how hard he tried, the cauldron drifted further away. It floated towards Snakey's shattered demon core, pulsing with golden light. Then, with a brilliant flash, the cauldron absorbed the remains of the core. Then, a massive golden image of a dragon materialized. Chen Fan froze, his expression shifting from disbelief to sheer terror. Why? Why would the cauldron help this snake? Could it be... This isn't an ordinary snake demon? But he will never get his answer. The golden dragon opened its mouth and unleashed an overwhelming surge of energy, obliterating him in an instant, leaving nothing but ashes. The explosion wasn't kind to little Snakey either. The immense energy coursed through his body, shattering him into several pieces. Just before everything went dark, all he heard was the humans screaming about how this wasn't supposed to happen. He was immortal. As the sun set, the chaos subsided. Little Snakey's battered body began to regenerate. Apart from a few terrified piglets nearby, the area grew quiet. Pain throbbed through him as he slowly regained consciousness. Ow, this hurts so much, he thought, tears streaming down his face. His body was exhausted and his strength drained, and he muttered bitterly how everything is gone. What he didn't notice was a faint reflection of a dragon shimmering in the water next to him. Back to where we started, those little piglets, perhaps out for revenge, had been gnawing on his tail after he'd eaten one of their own. After getting rid of the pigs, Snaky noticed something strange. He was still alive, even though his demon core was gone. Where his core had once been, a faintly glowing cauldron now pulsed with energy. It didn't take long for Snaky to realize the cauldron had somehow replaced his demon core. Stranger still, he could now sense his surroundings and even see inside his own body. Is this what human cultivators call spiritual sense? He wondered, thrilled by the discovery. With this ability, he could perceive everything around him even with his eyes closed. There was more. His mind was suddenly flooded with knowledge, memories of techniques from the human he'd swallowed earlier. Curling up, Snaky decided to test his luck, trying one of the techniques in hopes it might heal him like it had healed the human. He repeated the strange phrases the man had muttered, and to his amazement, the cauldron inside him began to activate. Warm energy spread through his body, radiating outward. Nearby plants bloomed, and his injuries started healing. His body glowed softly as wounds closed, and his once crippled tail looked as good as new. Within moments, he was completely revitalized. So this technique boosts cultivation, with healing as a bonus? Snaky marveled at the possibilities. He wasn't sure if the cauldron had fully replaced his core, but for now, he was alive, and that was enough. Feeling stronger, he decided it was time to leave this place and find a safer place to recover. At the same time, he realized that if a mere human boy was this strong, he definitely couldn't go around provoking humans anymore. But not before filling his belly. The clueless pigs were still lingering nearby, and Snaky figured survival was easier on a full stomach. Over the next few days, Snaky found a clear river and settled there. Using a bunny he'd caught earlier, he scrubbed himself clean, enjoying a rare moment of peace. His mind had been flooded with new knowledge. He learned that demon beasts, like humans, also cultivated in stages. For demon beasts, it started at the enlightenment stage where they gained intelligence. Snaky realized he was at the peak of the first level of enlightenment, equivalent to the peak of the human chi refinement stage. But every night, he dreamed of ancient mythical beasts shattering the heavens and splitting the earth. These visions sparked a fierce ambition within him. He wanted to become just as powerful. However, he also knew that if he wanted to avoid being skinned and roasted by humans, he'd need to focus on cultivation. So Snaky threw himself into mastering the mysterious technique he'd learned from the human. It not only made him stronger, but also improved his physical constitution. After each session, he expelled impurities from his body. Once, he even shed his skin, which left him feeling oddly rejuvenated. A week later, Snaky noticed subtle changes in his body. Tiny horns on his head had grown longer, his scales were however. The downside of all this is that he became much smaller, shrinking to mere 6 feet in length. While his reduced size made him less intimidating even to small birds, like this one for example, who now treated him like a harmless snack, Snaky didn't mind too much. The birds, after all, made for a quick and easy lunch. Though smaller, his speed and strength had increased significantly. His body had become more agile, allowing him to take down larger prey with ease. Best of all, his new size didn't stop him from swallowing big meals, which was what really mattered. By now, Snaky was sure of one thing. The cauldron inside him had indeed replaced his demon core. He realized that once the cauldron was filled, it would trigger his breakthrough to the next stage. However, hardcore cultivation came with a hefty energy cost. Absorbing spiritual energy from the surrounding helped, but he also needed a boost of blood energy, and that can only come from food. One evening, while slithering through a watermelon field, Snaky spotted a wild boar grazing nearby. Wild boars were large, ferocious beasts, but this one looked, well, kinda stupid. It didn't seem to have any intelligence, which meant it had to be weaker than Snaky. Feeling confident, he began creeping closer, clutching a few sharp stones tightly in his tail and mouth. He moved stealthily through the grass, smooth and silent. This'll be easy, he thought, or so he believed. Suddenly, the boar whipped its head around, locking eyes with him. Caught red-handed, little Snaky awkwardly set the stones down and tried to play it cool. So are these watermelons ripe? He asked sheepishly. The boar answered with an angry snort and a deafening roar before charging straight at him. Panicked, Snaky turned tail and bolted. Oh no, oh no, oh no! His heart raced as the boar barreled after him, but as he fled, he realized the path ahead was a dead end. He couldn't run forever. If he wanted to survive, he'd have to fight. Determined, Snaky scooped up the stones again, coiled his tail tightly, and flung them at the charging boar with all his strength. He wasn't aiming to kill, just injure it enough to buy himself time to escape. What happened next left him stunned. Each of the 4 stones he hurled hit with such force that they punched clean through the boar's massive body. The creature let out a final guttural cry before collapsing to the ground. Snakey stared in shock. For a moment he felt a flicker of pride. Am I actually this strong now? But ever cautious, he wasn't convinced. The boar could be faking it. Not one to take chances, he grabbed the leftover stones and hurled them at the lifeless body, just to be sure. After throwing all of the nearby stones, he let out a long sigh of relief. Okay, now it's definitely dead. He then cautiously approached the boar. Even so, his nerves were still on edge. That was way too close, he thought, trembling slightly. If I'd made even one mistake, that thing could have turned me into dinner. Still, Snakey knew better than to let his guard down. Even though the boar was clearly dead, he decided to take extra precautions. Using his tail and sharp fangs, he tore the boar into smaller pieces, just in case it somehow sprang back to life. Only when he was satisfied did he grab a boar leg and begin to eat in peace. He commented between bites saying the boar's meat is tougher than those farm pigs. But he liked it, chewy, with a wild, gamey flavor. As he chomped away, something hard jabbed his teeth. Curious, he spat it out and examined it. It was a huge demon core. A chill ran down his scales. So this boar was a demon beast after all. Snakey froze, remembering what he'd learned recently. Demon cores were brimming with untamed energy, and swallowing one raw could cause your body to explode from the inside out. The proper way to handle it was to refine the core into a pill or elixir first. But Snakey doesn't know how to do that. Then a thought struck him. But wild demon beasts don't refine cores, do they? They just swallow them whole. If eating cores was that dangerous, wouldn't demon beasts have gone extinct by now? He realized his knowledge came from a human perspective, and Snakey was clearly built differently. Licking his lips, Snakey decided to take the risk. He tossed the core into his mouth, struggling as its size made swallowing difficult. With one big gulp, he forced it down. Almost instantly, a surge of energy radiated from his stomach, faintly, growing warm and almost uncomfortably hot. Nervously, Snakey peeked inside with his spiritual sense and saw the cauldron in his body absorbing and purifying the core's energy. Relief washed over him as the purified energy spread through his body, filling him with power. Suddenly, a powerful surge erupted within him, and he felt his cultivation break through to the 2nd level. Excited, Snakey noticed immediate changes. 2 scales on his tail shimmered with a golden hue, and their hardness visibly increased. Curious, he flicked his tail at a nearby rock. To his amazement, the impact left a deep crack. "Whoa, I'm so much stronger now!" Snakey exclaimed, tail wagging in excitement. But his joy was short-lived. A faint rustling sound came from the bushes nearby. He froze, his eyes darting toward the noise. Emerging from the shadows was a human boy, gripping a pitchfork and glaring at him intently. A tense standoff unfolded. The boy gripped his pitchfork tightly, wondering if this old black snake was going to eat him. Meanwhile, little Snakey stared back, heart pounding, wondering if this boy was a cultivator. Could he be another Chen fan? Just as Snakey was spiraling into panic, the boy made the first move, charging forward and thrusting the pitchfork straight at him. Oh no, not again! Snakey's reflexes kicked in. With a swift flick of his tail, he shattered the pitchfork into splinters, not even stopping to look at the boy's stunned face. Without hesitation, he turned and bolted into the bushes. The boy watched the snake disappear into the distance, then ran home screaming to his father about how the old black snake had killed the demon boar that had murdered his mother, but somehow hadn't hurt him. Snakey, meanwhile, didn't stop running until he was sure no one was following him. Finally, as he climbed a set of stone stairs, he kept glancing back nervously. Was that kid just a normal human? Then, like a rock hitting him in the face, the realization dawned on him. He was developing a full-blown human phobia. Frustrated, he muttered to himself, calling himself a coward. How is he supposed to become a legendary beast if he keeps running like this? Determined to toughen up, Snakey made his way to the mountain's peak. Standing in front of the old mountain god temple, he looked up thoughtfully. Maybe humans are onto something with this praying business. If this is where he gained intelligence, it must be a lucky spot for him, right? To show his sincerity, he picked up 3 sticks to use as incense. But just as he was about to bow, a delicious smell wafted through the air. There, in front of the mountain god statue, was a spread of offerings. His stomach growled loudly. Well, it'd be a shame to let this go to waste. Even the mountain god wouldn't want that, right? With that flawless justification, Snaky helped himself to the offerings, devouring everything in sight. Once satisfied and full, he let out a loud burp before arranging the incense sticks in front of the statue. He bowed earnestly, murmuring his prayer. Dear mountain god, please help me overcome my inner demons, train successfully, and live a long life without humans trying to kill me. Thanks in advance. Just as he finished, a human voice suddenly broke the silence behind him. Snaky froze. Not again. Why are humans always showing up? He quickly slithered behind the statue, peeking out to see a human girl stumble into the temple. She was being chased by several men. This girl's not very smart, thought Snaky. Why would she run into a dead end? There's only one exit here. Unfortunately, that also meant escaping unnoticed wasn't an option for him either. Using his spiritual sense, he scanned the situation and spotted a man strutting toward the girl. Her hands trembled as she held a small dagger to her neck, her voice quivering as she threatened to end her life if he came closer. Even if she can't kill him, at least he won't get anything in return, she hissed. The man smirked, completely unfazed. When Snaky heard the man call himself Young Master Chu, a memory clicked. Wait, isn't this the guy who almost beat Chen Fan to death? A chill ran down Snaky's scales. If this guy could nearly kill Chen Fan, he must be terrifyingly strong. Chu moved quickly, disarming the girl with ease. Her dagger clattered to the floor as he clamped a hand over her mouth. Humans. Always so dramatic, Snaky thought, tilting his head. But then he noticed Chu wasn't just being threatening, he was acting weird. Oh no. Snaky's tail twitched in irritation. Is this guy in heat? Snaky found humans incredibly strange. Unlike snakes, who had a proper mating season in the spring, humans seemed to do this anytime they wanted. He couldn't understand why anyone would bother with such fragile creatures anyway. That girl wouldn't last a minute in the mountains. As Chu pushed the girl to the ground, he picked up her dagger and began taunting her. The girl's eyes burned with fury as she spat out, accusing Chu of forcing her to break off her engagement, killing her fiancé Chen Fan, and now trying to humiliate her. If I die, even as a ghost, I'll haunt you for the rest of your miserable life, she screamed. Snaky munched on an apple from the offerings, watching with mild curiosity. Humans are so weird. Why do they make everything so complicated? At that moment, the long-neglected mountain god statue betrayed him. Its arm, weakened by time, suddenly broke off and crashed to the floor. Both the girl and Chu froze, snapping their heads toward the noise. The girl's eyes widened in astonishment, believing the mountain god is here to save her. She leaped to her feet and rushed toward the statue. Chu, however, wasn't so easily convinced. Who's there? Come out now! He demanded. The girl began praying desperately, but when she glanced up, her heart nearly stopped. A 6-foot-long black snake was coiled around the mountain god statue, staring straight at her. Little Snaky, mid-bite on his apple, froze. The nearly finished fruit slipped from his mouth, bouncing onto the ground. At that moment, he knew he'd done goofed. The girl screamed and spun around to flee. In her panic, she ran straight into a dagger, which Chu instinctively raised at the sound of her scream. The blade pierced her and she collapsed to the ground, blood pooling beneath her. Chio's face twisted in shock. No, what have I done? He shouted, staring at her lifeless body. Hearing the commotion, Chu's lackeys burst into the temple, their eyes darting around asking what happened. Chu, trying to regain composure, tells them there's something in here and orders them to find it. Snaky's panic intensified as Chu added how he's an outer disciple of the Snake Hunter sect and no demon beast can escape out of his hands. Snake Hunter sect? Oh no, I'm in serious trouble. Chu pointed at the mountain god statue and ordered them to check behind it. The lackeys began poking and prodding, tapping the statue and surrounding areas to flush Snaky out. The sound of wood and stone being struck echoed through the temple, making Snaky's scales itch with anxiety. They're going to kill me! I can't just sit here and wait to die. Summoning every ounce of courage, Snaky decided to strike first. He burst from his hiding spot, sending the nearest lackey sprawling onto his backside with a terrified scream. Chu sneered at the sight, saying, "It's just a 6-foot snake demon." He scoffed, telling the two to give him a moment to gather his energy, and he will end this creature with one strike, followed up by saying Snaky's corpse will make a perfect tribute to the Snake Hunter sect. The lackey got back to his feet, then grabbed wooden sticks and charged at Snaky. Snaky quickly assessed the situation. That Chu guy is definitely the strongest. If he doesn't take out these two quickly, He won't stand a chance. With a decisive lash of his tail, Snaky slammed into the lackeys with all his strength. The air cracked like a whip as his golden-scaled tail tore through them, reducing their bodies to pulp in an instant. Snaky froze, staring wide-eyed at the carnage. Wait, that's it? They were this weak? Chio's concentration shattered at the sight of his lackey's remains, and the energy he'd been gathering dispersed. Trembling violently, he stumbled back, muttering in disbelief. What kind of creature is this? Without hesitation, Chio turned and bolted for the temple door, shouting over his shoulder that the snake hunter sect wouldn't let Snaky live, and his master will turn him into an elixir. Snaky knew he couldn't let Chio escape. If he brings his master here, he's dead for sure. Summoning all his speed, Snaky chased after the fleeing human and delivered a brutal strike on Chio's skull. With a deep sigh of relief, he dragged the body back to the mountain god temple. That was close, he thought, his heart still pounding. If he'd managed to gather his energy, he wouldn't have stood a chance. But then he glanced nervously at the mountain god statue. Wait, could this have happened because he ate the mountain god's offerings? A cold shiver ran down his scales. If the mountain god's mad, he's doomed. Thinking quickly, Snaky piled the 3 bodies together on the offering table, grabbed 3 more branches to use as incense sticks, and bowed deeply. Mighty mountain god, please don't be mad. I've brought you 3 humans as offerings to make up for what I ate. After a moment of prayer, an idea struck him. Maybe this was the mountain god's way of testing him, a trial to teach him to stop hiding all the time. In his mind, he could almost hear the mountain god reassuring him, "You're destined to become the strongest serpent in the demon-beast realm." With newfound purpose, Snaky vowed to double down on his cultivation and return to the forest to train. A week later, despite relentless efforts, Snaky's progress had been slow. The cauldron in his body was only halfway full, and the small animals he'd been eating weren't helping much. Frustrated and hungry, he longed for another demon boar like the one he'd eaten before. So he slithered back to the watermelon field, even trying to set up a trap. But his crude attempt failed to catch anything, not even a bird. Days passed with no sign of large prey. His stomach growled constantly, and the juicy watermelons in the field were becoming increasingly tempting. If wild boars like watermelons so much, maybe I'll try one, he thought. Just as he was about to take a bite, he spotted 2 humans walking by the river. A father and son were heading toward the field, chatting casually. To Snaky's dismay, the boy was the same one who'd wielded the pitchfork before. The boy was talking excitedly about the rising river and how they'd caught plenty of fish, while the man next to him carried a basket full of their catch. As the father and son got back to their home at the edge of the field, the boy suddenly stopped and glanced at the watermelon field. Despite the distance, it felt like the boy could see him. Little Snaky froze in panic. The boy shouted something and began running toward the field, carrying the basket of fish. Little Snaky scrambled up a nearby tree, doing his best to blend in with the branches. When the boy reached the base of the tree, he placed the basket on the ground and ran off, shouting over his shoulder, saying these fish are his way of saying thank you and tells him to come down and eat it. Little Snaky blinked in confusion, watched the boy run away, and then stared at the basket. Did he just offer me fish? Drool began to drip from his mouth as he cautiously slithered down the tree. Hunger gnawed at him, but so did suspicion. He needed to be more cautious, he wondered. Is this a trap? Could the fish be poisoned? He eyed the fresh, plump fish flopping in the basket. Their energetic movements reassured him a little. Maybe just one won't hurt, he thought. He tentatively swallowed the first fish, then waited. When nothing strange happened, he ate another, and another. Soon, he couldn't stop. Meanwhile, the boy was walking home, occasionally glancing back. Old Black Snake really seems to enjoy fish, he thought. Suddenly, a man stepped in his path, blocking his way. He asked if the boy had seen a black snake nearby. The boy's eyes fell on the badge at the man's waist, engraved with the word, snake. A chill ran down his spine. The man was from the snake hunting sect. Getting no response, the man barked impatiently. The boy hesitated, stammering, saying he hadn't seen any snake around here. Another hunter standing nearby scoffed, saying the kid was just a brat. What's the point of asking him anything? At that moment, a loud noise echoed from the mountain, startling nearby birds. The 2 snake hunters exchanged glances, then shoved the boy aside and ran toward the sound. The boy silently prayed, "Old Black Snake, run away quickly and don't get caught." At the same time, someone near the river shouted how the old black snake had once again eaten another person. Back to Little Snaky, our boy wasn't having the best time. While devouring the fish, He'd accidentally broken 2 bird eggs, earning a pair of painful lumps on his head from the furious parents. Worse still, he almost got discovered by the snake hunters. He'd heard the scream from the mountain too, but he was confused. What do they mean by eating humans? He was just eating fish. The boy's earlier actions puzzled him even more. Why did the boy lie to protect him? Shaking his head, Snaky muttered, "Humans are too complicated." Deciding the mountain was no longer safe, he slithered toward the river, planning to cross it. Maybe the other side will be safe for a few months, he thought. As he slipped into the water, another worry struck him. There are only 3 months left until winter, and he hasn't started storing food yet. Looks like his cultivation's going to be delayed. Suddenly, a massive shadow appeared in the water. Snaky looked up, startled. It was a giant swamp eel. Its movements resembled a snake's, and scars covered its body. Snaky's eyes narrowed as he realized something. This eel, it's the one that ate a human and framed him. Judging by its injuries, it must have barely escaped a fight with the snake hunters. The swamp eel didn't seem to notice Snaky at first. It was too busy devouring the fish nearby, swallowing them one by one, not even leaving the bones and all. When the eel saw him, Snaky knew it's fair game, and perhaps he could make the eel his meal too. He briefly considered. But then he dismissed the thought. If the eel managed to escape the powerful snake hunters, it must be powerful too. Better to stay alive than test his luck. Unfortunately, the eel spotted him. Its enormous mouth opened wide as it lunged at him. Snaky darted aside, narrowly avoiding the attack, causing the eel to smash into nearby rocks, sending debris flying. This isn't good, Snaky thought. He was running out of breath, and the eel wasn't giving up. Realizing he had no other choice, he decided to gamble everything on one desperate attack. He darted forward, slamming his head into the eel's abdomen while biting down hard. But as soon as he bit into the flesh, his stomach churned and he spat it out. Disgusting. The flesh had a foul, acrid taste, and it burned. To his shock, the water around them began to boil and erupt into flames. What's happening? Is this an illusion? Snaky remembered something from Chen Fan's cultivation technique. In any illusion, the first step is to control your breathing and calm your mind. Closing his eyes, Snaky began circulating his cultivation technique. A golden dragon materialized from within, surging outward and shattering the fiery illusion. Yes, I broke free, Snaky thought triumphantly, but his victory was short-lived. The swamp eel's massive jaws lunged at him again. With no time to dodge, Snaky instinctively coiled into a tight ball and lashed out with his tail. His golden-tipped tail struck with incredible force, slicing cleanly through the eel's body. Snaky stared at the severed eel in disbelief. Did I just cut it in half? Looking at his tail, he marveled at his strength. If just 2 golden scales are this powerful, imagine my whole body covered in them. But he quickly brushed aside his excitement. This fight was mostly luck. The eel was already injured and practically threw itself onto his tail. To be safe, Snaky chopped the eel into smaller pieces and tied them together with vines. Dragging the hefty load to the riverbank, he inspected his haul. The meat and demon core would sustain him for months, maybe even help him break through to the next level of cultivation. As he cleaned his spoils, a wooden badge fell from the eel's stomach. It was engraved with the word, snake. A chill ran down Snaky's spine. This eel ate a snake hunter? For a moment, Snaky felt a pang of respect for his defeated foe. Bowing slightly toward the remains, he murmured, "Brother Eel, you were a true hero, fighting the snake hunters for our snakes. But since you tried to eat me, I had no choice. Don't worry. I'll make sure none of your meat goes to waste. Your sacrifice won't be in vain." He swallowed the demon core in one gulp. It was larger than the last, lodging in his throat for a moment before he forced it down. With the meat tied securely, he slithered off into the forest. Back by the riverbank, the 2 snake hunters stumbled upon the severed head of the swamp eel. Examining the sharp teeth and torn fragments of their sect robes caught in its mouth, they cursed under their breath. "Damn," one muttered. They figured that they'd chased the wrong thing, and it was the old black snake that killed this demon eel. The senior snake hunter nodded but hesitated, glancing nervously at the towering trees around them. They thought of keep chasing, but this is Iron Bear Mountain after all. And there's that demon bear said to be at the peak of the 3rd level enlightenment. If they run into it, they're skewered for sure. The junior brother frowned, scratching his chin thoughtfully. He said how he heard something interesting about that old black snake recently. Apparently, the snake ate an alchemist and his human elixir. He believed the elixir's effects must still be lingering in the snake's body. If they managed to hunt it down, that elixir could help his senior brother break through to the 4th level. He leaned closer, saying how his senior brother had been stuck at the 3rd level for years. The senior brother stroked his chin, deep in thought. The idea was tempting, too tempting, but he shook his head slowly. Even so, going into this mountain now is too risky. That demon bear is no joke. If they're not careful, they will be its next meal. The junior grinned slyly, saying if that was the case, then they would just wait. In a few months, when the heavy snow comes, that bear demon will hibernate, and so will the snake. That's when they strike. Then they can track down old black snake and kill it. Meanwhile, little Snaky had found a cozy cave deep in the mountains. It was dark and dry, with old bones scattered across the floor from some unknown predator's past meals. Snaky carefully hung his bundles of eel meat from a protruding rock, ensuring they were out of reach of scavengers. With his spoils secure, he curled himself together into a comfortable position on top of the pile of bones, letting out a satisfied sigh. This spot's perfect, he thought. Food, shelter, and, most importantly, no humans in sight. Time flew by, and we fast-forward 2 months later. By now the forest was completely blanketed in snow, and Snaky hadn't expected his next breakthrough to be so tough. Nonetheless, after absorbing the demon core and eating most of the eel, he even grew 3 extra golden scales. Checking inside his body, the cauldron seemed full, and he just needed a small push to reach the 3rd level. But winter had arrived, and it was getting colder by the day. And as for his food stash, it was down to the last piece of meat. After some thought, he decided to hibernate for the season and deal with everything else once spring rolled around. However, what he didn't know was that trouble was already brewing elsewhere. On the other side of the mountain, a group of villagers was heading into the forest, led by the snake hunters sect, who had promised generous payment for finding a snake. Fired up, the villagers began bragging about their snake-catching skills. They even brought trained hunting dogs, supposedly experts at sniffing out snakes. However, the members of the sect didn't care for their boasting, waved them off impatiently, and ordered them to stop talking and focus on finding snakes. Meanwhile, an elderly villager frowned, thinking these cultivators were too arrogant. But the man beside him dismissed it, reasoning it didn't matter since they were getting paid. He even planned to use the money to send his son to school, proudly mentioning how much his son loved reading. Suddenly, the dogs at the front started barking like crazy. Soon they dug out the snow and found a cave. Deep underground, Snaky had no idea humans were scaling the mountain, let alone with trained dogs. Unfortunately for him, this was his weakest moment. His body was cold and stiff, and there was no way he could fight right now. Heck, even running away seemed impossible. Above ground, one of the villagers excitedly claimed the cave had to belong to the old black snake and started demanding his reward. But the snake hunters picked up some poop on the ground and said this is bear poop, and they found the wrong place. The villager looked confused, insisting his dogs never made mistakes. The man shrugged and pointed toward another cave in the distance, telling them to go check it out instead. Back in his hideout, Snaky listened as their footsteps faded away and let out a relieved sigh. Our boy was smart. He had blocked the cave entrance with stones, covered it with branches, and topped it off with bear poop to keep intruders away. Sometimes being extra cautious really paid off. Snaky wasn't one to take chances. Around his hiding spot, he had created several decoy caves, ensuring his actual hiding place was the deepest and best hidden. As the villagers approached the massive cave, they were growing increasingly irritated with the 2 snake hunters. Meanwhile, Snaky cautiously began gathering energy, trying to warm his stiff body and regain some strength. From afar, the 2 brothers had already planned everything out. The villagers were right about the snake's location, but now that the target was found, the villagers were no longer useful. Plus, they wouldn't have to pay anyone if no one survived. The villagers, oblivious to the scheme, eyed the cave entrance with suspicion. Something about it felt off. Suddenly, one of the snake hunters muttered a spell and darted toward another direction, saying that he would lure out the bear, and once it was done with the villagers, they would team up, take down the bear demon, and finish off that old black snake. Curled up in his cave, Snaky couldn't believe what he was hearing. These humans were plotting to have their own people killed. He marveled at how terrifying human nature could be. But this wasn't the time to dwell on morality. The real problem was that his cover was blown, and he needed to figure out a way out. At first, he thought about making a run for it. Maybe he could use the chaos to his advantage, eat the bear, and then deal with the two cultivators later. But he immediately dismissed the idea as absurd. If it took both of them to fight the bear, there's no way he could do it on his own. Not to mention the humans won't just stand and watch. Just then, Snaky overheard the senior brother calling his junior an idiot. He sneered, saying he hadn't planned to share anything with him, as the bear and the snake were only enough for one of them to break through. Snaky perked up. It seemed they were turning on each other, which meant this was his chance. By now, his body had recovered slightly, and he cautiously poked his head out of the cave. Before long, a villager's terrified scream echoed through the forest. A massive bear demon burst out of the cave. Panicked, the villagers scrambled toward the snake hunters, begging for their help. But the two men stood on a rocky ledge, doing absolutely nothing. It was then that the villagers realized they had been duped. These cultivators had used them to locate the old black snake and deliberately sent them to the bear cave to get them killed. Furious, the villagers drew their weapons, hurling curses at the two bastards. An arrow was shot toward the snake hunters. Though it was easily dodged, it grazed one of their storage pouches. Snaky quietly slithered closer and snagged one of the pills that fell out. Recognizing it as a rejuvenation pill, his mouth watered. Just one whiff of it sent warmth coursing through his stiff body. Meanwhile, chaos continued above. The bear was tearing through the villagers. The junior brother, looking anxious, asked his senior to help him gather the scattered items. The senior brother bent down with a sigh, scolding him for being careless, but slyly pocketed most of the items into his own pouch, thinking smugly that it was all his now. Below, the last villager fell. The junior brother complimented his senior on the clever plan, though both seemed surprised that the villagers had lasted so long. Just as the senior brother was feeling smug, the junior struck. With a quick spell, a gust of wind blasted the senior off the ledge. The guy fell onto the snow, breaking his arm in the process. The bear noticed him immediately and began crawling over. Furious, he screamed curses at his junior, but the junior simply floated in the air, let out a chuckle, and asked him if he really thought he wouldn't know about his plan. He said he's not stupid and he's been planning this for a while now. Turned out that he didn't care about the bear or the snake, he just wanted to have the senior brother killed. All of a sudden, the black bear swung its massive paw, catching the senior brother off guard. Unable to charge a proper spell in time, he desperately used an explosive talisman. The resulting blast injured the bear but left him no chance to escape, and he was blasted to pieces too. Glancing at the now enraged bear, he knew it was time to report back to the sect. Meanwhile, Snaky had been watching all of this unfold. Without a second thought, he swallowed the rejuvenation pill and burst out of his cave. When he saw two more pills lying in the snow, he grabbed them, tucking them behind his fangs, and planned to save them for later. However, the explosion and blood also attracted a pack of wolves and quickly encircled Snaky. Snaky's stomach growled, saying it's perfect timing since he's kinda hungry. These wolves are just regular wolves, so they didn't stand a chance. Before they could react, Snaky moved in a blur, swallowing one of them right away. He also noticed after he got stronger, he also digested very fast, so one wasn't enough for him. The more he ate, the hungrier he felt. So he lunged at the pack again, devouring wolf after wolf, but it still wasn't enough. Terrified by the massacre, the remaining wolves scattered into the forest. But as they fled, Snaky looked up and saw the black bear still standing there. For a moment, he wondered just how tasty would that big, juicy bear demon be. The bear, though heavily injured, still had the strength to swat a wolf to its death with a single paw. Snaky sized it up and roughly estimated its strength. It was at the peak of the 3rd level. In comparison, he was barely at the peak of the 2nd level. However, he quickly found his body began radiating heat, and his stomach growled uncontrollably. But he knew he couldn't let his instincts cloud his judgment. He soon realized the overwhelming desire seemed to come from the cauldron inside him, urging him to consume the bear demon. Snaky thought for a moment and realized that this might be his best shot. The bear was injured, and constantly running away wouldn't help him grow stronger. Taking a deep breath, he steeled his nerves. If I plan this out and be extra cautious, I might actually win this. With that, he launched himself toward the bear. The black bear was quick, snatching Snaky out of the air with one massive paw and squeezing him tightly. Pain shot through his body, but he swung his tail toward the bear's face, landing a hit square on its eye. The bear roared in pain, releasing him and clutching its injured eye. Snaky fell hard on the snow, and his whole body began to hurt. Damn, this bear is at least 10 times stronger than that eel, he thought, but at least he blinded the bear. At the same time, the rejuvenation pill effects were fading. His body was starting to stiffen again. Without hesitation, he swallowed another pill. He didn't bother healing himself just yet. Instead, he darted toward the bear once more, this time sinking his fangs deep into its neck. The bear roared in pain, slamming its massive paws into Snakey. He dodged as best as he could but still took several direct hits. Snakey almost felt like all of his bones were broken, but he refused to let go. I can't let go. I have to end this. With every ounce of strength he had, he bit down harder, causing his fangs to tear deeper into the bear's flesh. The bear, in a desperate move, yanked him off with its claws and hurled him back into the snow. Snakey once again landed heavily, but as he looked up, he saw the bear staggering onto the ground, blood gushing from its torn neck, while letting out weak but agonized growls. Snakey didn't rush in for another attack. Instead, he spotted a nearby tree stump, dragged it over, and carefully positioned himself. With all his strength, he smashed the stump down onto the bear's head, so much so that he lost count of how many times he smashed the bear. Only when everything looked like a mess did Snakey dare to approach. Just to be cautious, Snakey decided to retreat to a safe distance and focus on healing his wounds. But before he could even begin, he heard footsteps approaching. Turning his head, he saw the wolf pack had returned. Snakey hissed, convinced they had come to steal his spoils. Still bleeding and barely able to move, Snakey had no choice. He swallowed the last rejuvenation pill, temporarily regaining just enough energy to keep fighting. 2 hours later, Snakey finally took down every single wolf. Exhausted and covered in blood, he realized the pill's effects were once again wearing off. He had to find a safe place to recover, or he'd be in serious trouble if the snake hunters came back. Dragging his battered body, he began working quickly. Using strips of cloth torn from the villagers' clothing, he made a rope and started slicing the bear demon's body into manageable pieces and tied it together. As he passed the fallen villagers, he felt something strange. Since humans often spoke of reincarnation, he wondered how many lifetimes would it take for these souls to find peace. Among the bodies, one caught his eye. It was the boy's father, the very boy who had given him the fish before. The man's body lay torn in two. But near him were the 2 hunting dogs, lying silently beside their master. Their noses and paws were frozen stiff, yet they refused to leave. "Hey," Snakey muttered, slithering closer. "He tells the dogs that the man is already dead, and if they stay here, they will just freeze to death." However, he didn't get any response. He nudged one of the dogs and realized it was already frozen solid. Snakey brushed his scales gently over the dog's stiff fur. Even though their master was dead, these dogs stayed by his side. He didn't understand it, but a strange feeling began forming in his chest. Looking around the place littered with bodies and carnage, Snakey realized the only survivor of this entire mess was that cunning and treacherous human from the snake hunting sect. But none of this matters. Thinking about it wouldn't change anything. As for Snakey, all he can care right now is to stay alive, whatever future comes his way. He slithered away until his body was completely out of strength. Finally, he found a cave with a pond outside. Without wasting any time, he began devouring the bear. "Damn, this thing tastes amazing," he thought, as he tore into the meat. It was then that he realized his cauldron was more excited than he were. As he ate, the cauldron in his body started absorbing the bear's immense energy. His tail shimmered, and a few more golden scales appeared. At the same time he broke through. Snakey didn't just stop there. In the end, he managed to reach the peak of the 3rd level. Tears of joy welled up in his eyes as he glanced at his tail. He now had a total of 10 golden scales. Hard work really pays off, he thought. Still, he reminded himself to stay cautious. Then an idea sparked in his mind. If a 3rd-level bear demon could rule this mountain, perhaps by spring, he could claim it for himself. The months of winter passed peacefully, and no one's there to interrupt him. 3 months later, spring arrived. Snakey stirred awake, stretching his now 8-foot-long body while having a total of 11 golden scales on his tail. Not to mention his spiritual sense had expanded considerably as well. As he scanned the area, he picked up on the presence of 2 wild boars nearby. Snakey approached the 2 wild boars, focusing on the larger one first. In a swift attack, he took down the hefty male. When he turned to the other, he noticed it was a pregnant female. After a brief moment of thought, he decided to let her go. Seems like Snakey is starting to grasp the importance of balance in the ecosystem. Dragging the male boar's body away, Snakey pondered his next steps. Returning to the village was no longer an option. His best bet was to adapt to mountain life and figure out a way to sustain himself. Simply ruling the mountain wouldn't be enough. If he wanted the forest to keep providing, he couldn't kill indiscriminately, especially not the young or the pregnant. As he devoured the boar, he used his spiritual sense to map out the mountain. He counted everything, with 25 roe deer, 20 wild boars, 30 musk deer, and hundreds of rabbits, along with several hundred more of other animals. He did some quick planning and thought it should be enough for him to sustain for a couple more years. However, if he wanted to get stronger, he'd need more than just ordinary prey. Reflecting on everything he's been through, he realized that cultivation required both opportunity and risk. Perhaps it's time to return to his birthplace. The scene then shifted to Myriad Serpent's Valley, the place where Snakey grew up. With spring's arrival, the valley came alive. The season of renewal also meant it was the mating season. Everywhere he turned, snakes of all sizes were pairing up. Snakey was soon approached by a small, white snake. She wrapped itself around his body affectionately. Every year this little white snake sought him out, but Snakey was no longer the same. He was a cultivating snake. A snake with his sights set on immortality, so he firmly pushed her away. The memories of his younger days flickered in his mind. Back then, he would have joined the others without a second thought, shamelessly indulging in the season's primal call. But now, after gaining intelligence and starting his journey on the path of cultivation, he now has his priorities. In the heart of the valley stood the rainbow tree, a mystical plant that bore the legendary serpent fruits. These fruits matured once every 3 years. Consuming one could greatly enhance a snake's strength, making it especially valuable for their kind. 3 years ago, Snakey had accidentally swallowed a serpent fruit, and that single fruit was enough to gain him some intelligence. This time, he thought, what if he ate 3 of them in one go? Could he finally break through to the 4th level? That would also mean he'd be able to use spells too. Just then, he spotted people walking into the valley. There were 2 of them, and both were from the snake hunting sect. One of the voices sounded vaguely familiar, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had heard it before. The 2 of them stepped into the valley. One was a man, looking somewhat dejected, saying he just wished his senior brother was still here. The woman beside him cut him off, telling him the past is the past and it's useless to dwell on it. However, she did compliment him for finding this place. When Snakey noticed they were indeed snake hunters, his heart sank. Of all the people to show up, it had to be them. Listening closely, the man even offered to let the woman take all the serpent fruits. However, she refused, saying 2 would be enough for her. Then they began covering their mouths and noses with cloth and smeared some sort of liquid on their bodies. The man also knew every spiritual treasure has a guardian beast, so they need to be extra careful. But the woman just waved it off, telling him to relax, because she had borrowed a powerful artifact from their master. She is also aware the only demon beast here is the old Serpent King. She even thought about how its gallbladder will make a perfect medicinal ingredient. Snakey's blood boiled after hearing all this. They're after the serpent fruits, and they've brought an artifact specifically to deal with me. He coiled up, unsure whether to run away or stay and fight. The fruits were so close to ripening, he couldn't just let them take it. Remembering how both the eel and the bear managed to kill a cultivator, he reminded himself that he was now at the peak of the 3rd level. Maybe these snake hunters weren't as strong as he thought. Suddenly, a sharp, acrid smell filled the air. Snakey felt his head spin, and a wave of nausea swept over him. The smaller snakes in the valley began slithering away in droves. Snakey himself had to dove into the nearby pond. He decided to wait a little. After all, humans seem to have a talent for turning on each other. As the 2 snake hunters ventured deeper into the valley, many of the smaller snakes had already been knocked out by the acrid smell. The man didn't seem to care whether the old Serpent King showed up or not. He just wanted to grab the serpent fruit. The woman, however, was confident the Serpent King would definitely show up. She reasoned that it had lived for more than a decade, and its life force was running out. The serpent fruits are probably the only thing keeping it alive at this point. Hidden in the water, Snakey covered his nose and glared at them. Running out of life force? Me? You're the one running out of life force. Your whole family is. He fumed silently, thinking that his body was in perfect condition and he was growing stronger every day. These 2 are talking nonsense. Still, thinking about how villagers used to call him Old Black Snake. Why did these 2 call him another name? Whatever the reason, this wasn't the time to dwell on it. The 2 humans were already getting dangerously close to the rainbow tree. The woman then said it was almost coming out. Snaky's heart skipped a beat, wondering if the woman already knew he was here. All of a sudden, something massive burst out from behind the two and lunged at them with lightning speed. They reacted quickly, dodging just in time. The attacker was revealed to be an enormous snake, far larger than Snaky himself. So this is the old Serpent King they were talking about? Snaky thought with his jaw practically dropping. Wait, could this be the real old black snake? Was it out causing trouble years ago and came back to retire here, leaving me to take the blame when I got spotted 3 years ago? Either way, the Serpent King attacked once again. The woman quickly cast a spell, blocking the strike. The clash sent shockwaves rippling through the valley. By now, Snaky had a pretty good idea of how strong these snake hunters were. However, he couldn't help but feel worried for the old Serpent King. Could it really hold its ground against them? The next moment, the woman pulled out a bell-type artifact. The bell rang out, echoing through the valley and forcing the Serpent King to retreat. Snaky winced in agony, trying to cover his ears. Oh wait, he doesn't have hands. The woman followed up by hurling a few razor-sharp darts at the Serpent King, but they merely bounced off its scales. She smirked and said, with scales like this, they could make some real good armor. Then, the man joined the fight, teaming up against the old Serpent King. They darted around its massive body and used all types of weapons and artifacts. And from Snaky's point of view, the Serpent King was visibly slowing down. So this is the power of human artifacts? He'd never seen anything like it before. It was clear the Serpent King was struggling. Snaky debated what to do. Should he step in and help, or sneak away with the serpent fruits? But the fruits weren't ready yet, and eating them now might not have any effect. He picked up a piece of stone, wanting to help from the side. Just then, he saw someone near the rainbow tree. Turning his head, he saw another human. Someone was creeping toward the tree while the snake hunters were busy fighting the Serpent King. What shocked Snaky was that the man was trying to dig the entire tree out. Snaky was furious. This human was trying to destroy the root. What a greedy bastard. The man looked up just in time to see a massive set of jaws lunging toward him. In a panic, he yanked the rainbow tree with all his strength, uprooting it entirely. Snaky showed no mercy. With a swift motion, he swallowed the man whole. Because the man clung so tightly to the tree, he accidentally swallowed the tree as well. Before he could spit it back out, pain shot through him as the energy from the tree's leaves spread through his body. He legit thought he was going to explode. Snaky summoned all his strength and finally managed to spit out the tree along with the man's remaining bones. He initially thought he was poisoned, but after a quick scan of his body, to his relief, it's just the leaves that he digested had too much energy, and the cauldron had simply absorbed too much energy too quickly. Strangely, those few leaves had taken much longer to digest than the man who tried to steal the tree. But he didn't have time to think. With the tree uprooted, he couldn't let it fall into the snake hunter's hands. On the other side of the valley, the battle with the Serpent King had reached its grim conclusion. Its massive body lay in pieces. The man plopped down on the corpse, catching his breath, while complimenting his senior sister. The woman simply smiled, brushing off the compliment and telling him it was time to go for the fruits. But when they arrived, the tree was already gone. Before the woman even says anything, the man accuses her of keeping the tree to herself. He followed up saying if she wanted, she could just say so. There's no need to do this type of thing behind his back. This got the woman angry, and she asked what the hell is he talking about. Their voices grew louder as accusations flew back and forth. Snaky, hidden in a safe spot nearby, used his spiritual sense to observe them. Perfect. They're already blaming each other. If they end up fighting, that'll make things even better. Unable to convince each other, the man pulled out a teleportation jade from their sect, intending to call their master to settle the dispute. Before he could activate it, a hand grabbed his wrist. Startled, he looked up only to see it was their senior brother. It turned out their master had secretly sent him to protect the duo. But seeing them squabble over the tree, he was not happy. The two then looked at him, wondering if it was him who took the tree. He shook his head and explained it wasn't him. He assumed it was someone who sent a mortal to dig up the tree and then retrieved it. Otherwise, he'd have sensed the spiritual fluctuations and tracked them down already. He scanned the area and decided to follow the footmarks. Frustrated, the group searched the area, but the footsteps just randomly disappeared. He didn't give up, saying as long as the person is alive, he will surely find him. The two nodded. After all, their senior brother is already at the 6th level. Surely no one could escape from him. Hearing this from his hiding spot, Snaky's heart sank. 6th level? That's ridiculous. He was deep underground, so if he just suppressing his spiritual sense and didn't reveal any energy, then no one should find him. But then, he smelled something. Turning his head, the serpent fruits had ripened. Their aroma quickly spread throughout the valley, which also meant he had blown his cover. The senior brother pointed below and said it came from underground. Casting a spell, he dove straight into the ground. Snaky began panicking a little because he knew reaching the 4th level is considered the mid-stage, and by then, both cultivators and demon beasts would be able to use spells. In desperation, he tossed all of the fruit into his mouth and the cauldron inside him roared to life, rapidly refining the energy from the fruits. It didn't take long for the man to find Snaky's hiding spot. But Snaky had already fled. The man then ate a pill to boost his own speed, then pulled out an artifact from the sect's old master, believing that as long as he wasn't facing a Foundation establishment, he should be fine. The dude then dug into the ground, almost like he was swimming in the dirt. "Come on, Cauldron," Snaky prayed desperately. "Refine faster. If you don't finish, we're both dead." It was as if the cauldron inside Snaky understood him. Its mouth opened wide, and the speed of refining the serpent fruits sped up dramatically. At the same time, golden energy flooded Snaky's body, spreading through every muscle and scale. His fangs elongated, his muscles swelled, and he also shed his old skin, and several more golden scales appeared along his tail. Just as the senior brother caught sight of Snaky deep underground, Snaky managed to break through to the 4th level. The senior brother froze for a moment, stunned. It was only now that he realized what he had been chasing all this time wasn't a fellow cultivator, but a snake. And not just any snake. What he saw before him was a creature that had only just advanced to the 4th level, meaning it was at the mid-stage. The idea of a snake grabbing the tree and running before he even got here is mind-boggling, because even some Foundation establishment demon beasts aren't this clever. The realization hit him hard. If he could capture this extraordinary creature and take it back to the sect, it would be a major accomplishment. Snaky, on the other hand, was still running away as fast as he could. He could feel his newfound power coursing through him, and was certain he could escape. But just as he thought he'd gained the upper hand, he noticed the human's speed increase significantly. Before Snaky could react, the human hurled something toward him. He looked around and saw a rope-type artifact. Snaky's tail whipped out instinctively, trying to deflect the rope. But to his shock, it neither broke nor veered off course. The man let out a cold laugh, saying, not even a late-stage enlightenment beast could escape this. But Snaky wasn't ready to roll over. He understood these artifacts were controlled by spiritual senses. If that's the case, he decides to first erase their connection. Channeling his energy, a golden dragon appeared that lashed out toward the artifact. However, it didn't work. The man sneered, calling Snaky foolish, and explained that his beast-taming rope is reinforced many times, and only a Foundation establishment cultivator could break it from his control. Snaky didn't respond. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. He opened his jaws wide and swallowed the artifact. The artifact began thrashing and colliding violently inside his body. Pain racked him, but he kept it together. The man froze, couldn't believe his eyes. Before he could react further, Snaky was on the move again, slithering deeper underground. The chase continued for an exhausting hour, with Snaky weaving effortlessly through tight spaces, while the man was forced to expend more and more of his energy casting spells to navigate the terrain. Gradually, the man was running low on spiritual energy, and he wanted to end this fast and retrieve his artifact. Snaky, meanwhile, felt the artifact in his belly settle down, but he knew that running wasn't a long-term solution. If he wants to survive, he needs to deal with the human now. Noticing that the man was keeping a consistent distance of about 10 meters, Snaky realized this was what the man considered a safe range. He began to slow down deliberately, faking like he was tired. The man smirked at the sight. Finally running out of energy, huh? With his artifact swallowed, the man decided on a new plan. He would slice Snaky open to retrieve it. As long as he keeps Snaky alive, he can still bring it back to the sect. The man muttered a spell, sending a wave of energy hurtling toward Snaky. But with a flick of his tail, he effortlessly deflected the attack. In that split second, Snaky surged forward, closing the gap in an instant. The spell that could have killed most mid-stage demon beasts hadn't even scratched Snaky. Panicked, he drew his weapon and quickly slashed forward. Snaky coiled his tail to block the man's attack. Even with all his strength, the man couldn't pierce Snaky's hardened golden scales. In a swift counter, Snaky lashed out, shattering the man's sword and slamming him into a rock. The man crumpled to the ground, one arm dangling on one side. That strike had drained nearly all his remaining spiritual energy. He stared at Snakey before him in shock and disbelief. This isn't an ordinary snake demon. Could it be a young flood dragon? If that's the case, then he stands no chance, so he decided to escape and report this to the sect. But his body was in shambles, and his spiritual energy was nearly depleted. Could he even manage another spell? Snakey lunged again, aiming to finish the man. Just then he spotted an opening above, a hole in the ceiling of the cave. Using the last of his energy, he cast a spell to launch himself upward. But then he noticed some discarded snakeskin blocking his way. He realized this was the skin Snakey shed a while back. Realization hit him, and he wondered if Snakey had this all planned out. Terror washed over him as he glanced back to see Snakey charging toward him. He scrambled, but before he could react, the snake's jaws clamped down, tearing off his remaining arm. His scream echoed through the valley, so loud that it caught the attention of the two other snake hunters above. Desperate, the man activated an explosive talisman, blasting a tunnel upward and away from Snakey. Blood gushed from his wounds as he clutched his shoulder. He then shouted to the other two, telling them to run while saying there was a flood dragon. The mention of a flood dragon froze the two snake hunters in their tracks. These powerful creatures are typically around the nascent soul stage. Soon, they all began running in different directions. Snakey quickly caught up, and although surprised to see the man still able to activate an explosive talisman, he knew he couldn't let him get away. The man was so close to escaping the valley. Beside him lay the corpse of the old Serpent King, lifeless and mangled, or so he thought. Without warning, the Serpent King's eyes snapped open. Out of nowhere, it spewed a stream of venom directly at the man. He screamed, collapsing to the ground in agony as the venom burned through his body. He cursed himself for forgetting that even a severed snakehead can still spit venom. Frantically, he fumbled for an antidote pill and swallowed it. But Snakey was hot on his heels. Desperate, the man pulled out his trump card, a high-grade spiritual stone that he originally planned to use for cultivation. Activating it, he channeled the energy. He suddenly became incredibly fast. Ah shit, he's getting away. He was so much faster, chasing was out of the question, but Snakey couldn't let the man live. Grimacing in pain, Snakey yanked out one of his golden scales. With a powerful flick of his tail, he hurled the scale like a blade. The sharp scale cut through the air, piercing the man's back. But Snakey wasn't done yet. One by one, he flung more golden scales, each one hitting its mark. The final scale penetrated the man's heart, and another into his skull before finally finishing him. Snakey slithered over cautiously. Tears welled up and Snakey was really hurt, but at least the man was dead. But again, he wasn't taking any chances. So he raised his tail and began smashing the man's body repeatedly. Only when the man turned to a human patty did Snakey finally stop. And right now, he can only hope those golden scales can grow back. Snakey didn't bother pulling out the golden scales stuck in the guy's body. He just swallowed him along with it. Eat what you lose, right? Maybe they'll grow back. After gulping him down, he grabbed the guy's storage pouch, hoping to find something good in there. Snakey first wiped the man's spiritual senses off the bag and added his own. However, he heard a voice behind him. "Kid, live well." The faint voice made him turn around. It was the old Serpent King, and that was his last words. Snakey stared, his lost memories suddenly flooding back. 3 years ago, when the serpent fruits ripened, Snakey was tiny, dumb, and possibly the weakest of them all. All the snakes in the valley fought over the 2 fruits, while Snakey didn't stand a chance. He got shoved around, all he could do was coil up. Just then, the Serpent King showed up. The moment it appeared, the fighting stopped. Every snake froze, dropping low to the ground, including Snakey. But to his surprise, the king pushed one of the serpent fruits toward him. That single serpent fruit changed everything. But even after all this time, he couldn't figure out why. Snakes were known for being cold-blooded, ruthless, and selfish. All of the snakes followed one principle, which is survival of the fittest. So why did the Serpent King help him? Looking at the Serpent King, Snakey whispered, "Why did you do it?" But the old Serpent King could no longer answer. At that very moment, the whole valley seemed to hold its breath. Snakey started trembling. Tears slid down his face. A strange feeling welled in his chest. First, it was sadness, then turning darker until it was pure anger and hatred. "Snake hunters," he growled. "I'll never forgive you. Never." After a while, Snakey brought over a few stones and mimicked the way how humans would set up a small gravestone for the old Serpent King. He quietly hoped that in his next life, the Serpent King could reincarnate as a human. Looking at the makeshift grave, he whispered, I've been thinking about your last words, and I think I get it now. Any creature that gains wisdom always cares about the next generation. I'll remember that. One day when I'm strong enough, I'll make sure to pass on what I've learned too. He then let out a sigh, but right now, I'm still too weak. With the valley discovered by the snake hunters, staying here was no longer an option. As he prepared to leave, he noticed the woman from earlier was lying on the ground, barely breathing. Snakey wondered if he ate the human, would his golden scales grow back a bit quicker? But his cautious nature made him stop and think. She was already running away earlier. Why would she end up here? Could this be a trap? Deciding to observe first, he slithered into hiding. He looked around, trying to find the other person. He recalled how the man had betrayed his senior brother when fighting the bear demon. Could he be behind this too? Maybe he deliberately left the old Serpent King's head at the exit to set up some kind of scheme. Before he could figure it out, a massive python slithered out of nowhere and swallowed the woman in one gulp. Snakey hissed, tried to warn the python, but it was too late. The next moment, the python's body exploded into bloody chunks. Snakey recoiled in shock. It really was a trap. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the forest, the man knelt before a row of graves. Hearing the distant explosion, he knew the woman must have died. The graves belonged to his parents and younger sister. He had carved them himself. With a heavy heart, he murmured that he had avenged them. He murmured something about out of the 5, 3 are dead. All it left is Chen Dowling and the last remaining disciple. Taking a deep breath, he picked up a poisonous snake nearby and let it bite his shoulder. Blood seeped from the wound as he grimaced, but he didn't flinch. Activating his communication talisman, he sent a message to his sect, and then deliberately collapsed to the ground. An hour later, 2 figures arrived. One was Chen himself, and the other was a disciple of his. Surveying the aftermath, they found the junior brother barely alive. They quickly fed him an antidote pill, assuring him that he would survive with a few months of rest. The man said it was all his fault, and that he wasn't strong enough to protect anyone. Chen clenched his fists after hearing the entire story. He yelled out that he would find the demon beast behind it and kill it himself. By now, Snakey had made it safely back to Iron Bear Mountain. He figured the snake hunters were still busy poking around Valley, so this place should be safe for now. Best of all, he'd managed to drag the rainbow tree back with him. Though he'd eaten a lot of its branches and leaves, the tree itself didn't seem completely dead. He picked a nice spot in the cave and planted it there, hoping it would survive. With that done, he then began checking out the storage pouch. He tipped it out, and its contents spilled onto the ground. Most of it was food and pills, and maybe these will help his golden scales grow back quicker. That was already intriguing, but what caught his eye the most was a book titled The Record of Myriad Serpents. Flipping through it, he felt like a door to a whole new world had opened. The book detailed different types of snakes, including this one here with internal demon flames that could spit fiery poison capable of killing anything it touched. Then he realized this was his own species. In the book, he was called the Black Yin Snake. The book also had stories about snakes that reached Foundation establishment and beyond. However, even those powerful serpents, capable of spitting fire and causing havoc, could still be slain by human cultivators with a single sword strike. It was a humbling reminder of how dangerous humans were. Besides the book, there was also a jade slip. Snakey could tell it was special just by looking at it. Using his spiritual sense to probe it, he discovered it contained detailed instructions on human 5-element spells, complete with learning methods which made him quite thrilled. 1 month later, Snakey had made a ton of progress. His Earth Escape spell was now faster than that senior brother's. Another good news is that his golden scales had fully regrown, and his tail was stronger than ever. With his ability to burrow quickly and hide, he was confident most snake hunters wouldn't be able to catch him. Well, there's also a tiny downside, which is that using these techniques drained his energy fast, and whenever he overused them, his stomach would rumble like crazy. Still, as a trump card, they were perfect. Even better, he'd learned a fireball spell, which allowed him to cook food on his own. Eating roasted meat was a game changer. The book said that snakes like him couldn't produce demon flames until they reached Foundation establishment. But somehow, he was already doing it. He wasn't sure why, but he wasn't complaining. One day, while munching on a roasted chicken leg, a massive wolf quietly approached. Snakey immediately noticed it wasn't an ordinary wolf, but rather a wolf demon. He thought for a moment. Maybe he could make the wolf his underlings. He pulling out the beast-taming rope and flung it towards it. The rope latched onto the wolf, and no matter how much it struggled, it couldn't escape. Snakey then ordered it to sit down, so the wolf dropped to the ground. Amused, Snaky started testing its obedience. He made the wolf roll over, beg, play dead, and even try a few cute poses. It was surprisingly fun. Eventually, Snaky climbed onto the wolf's back and stretched out lazily, and they went out for a quick run. After exploring the entire forest, Snaky noticed something interesting. Most of the animal populations had increased, except for the sheep, which stayed the same. Must be the wolves eating them, he thought. The rabbits, though, were a different story. Their numbers had exploded, with over 100 new ones hopping around. Snaky nodded in satisfaction. The forest was thriving. But then, a familiar scent caught his attention. Following it, he spotted the little white snake from Valley. Did she follow my scent all the way here? He slithered closer to take a better look. Sure enough, he realized the little white snake was also his species, though her scales had mutated into a pale, silvery color. But she hadn't become a demon beast, hadn't awakened her intelligence, and definitely couldn't speak. So Snaky considered her as his junior. Seeing him, the little white snake happily coiled herself around him, rubbing against him affectionately. After a moment's thought, Snaky decided it was only right to look out for her since she was part of his kind. But before he could make any plans, the wolf demon growled, clearly thinking the little white snake was attacking Snaky. Snaky snapped, telling the wolf to cut it out, saying he's not being attacked and he needs to be more friendly. The wolf tried to smile, but his sharp fangs made it look more terrifying than friendly. Snaky tells the wolf that he will take off the beast-taming rope, but the wolf has to agree to a few things. The wolf immediately nodded enthusiastically. First, the wolf has to willingly be his underling. Every day he must hunt and bring the food to his cave. The wolf nodded. Second, Snaky put him in charge of patrolling the mountain. If any humans show up, he must come and tell Snaky right away. But if the wolf fails at either job, he will then become dinner. The wolf quickly agreed, his tail wagging nervously. Satisfied, Snaky removed the artifact. The wolf licked him several times in excitement, but Snaky recoiled in disgust, telling him to get to work. The wolf ran off, and Snaky slithered back to his cave with the little white snake. He placed her near the rainbow tree, which still looked like it was recovering. He tells her to stay here and decides to teach her some basic cultivation techniques. If she's going to stick around, she might as well learn something useful. Meanwhile, back at Valley, Chen Dowling and his remaining disciples had been tirelessly searching for the so-called flood dragon. Despite their use of magical artifacts, they hadn't found any trace of such a creature. Chen Dowling shook his head, thinking the idea of a flood dragon in a place like this was ridiculous. If that were true, even he wouldn't have survived, let alone anyone else. So he thought it was probably just a snake demon that's gained some intelligence. He suspected his eldest disciple had exaggerated to save himself from embarrassment after losing to a snake demon. But just as he was dismissing the idea, one of their artifacts lit up, detecting a strong demonic presence coming from a mountain in the distance. Soon, the two immediately made their way toward Iron Bear Mountain, splitting up to search from different directions. The disciple carefully made his way up the mountain. He could sense the faint aura of a snake demon nearby, but it wasn't strong enough to confirm it was their target. However, what he didn't realize was that he had stumbled into the territory of a wolf pack led by the Wolf King. Wolfie here, now in charge of the pack, noticed the intruder. Growling low, he gathered his wolves and prepared to attack. The wolves surrounded the disciple, and on his command, they all charged. However, the disciple unleashed a simple spell, easily dispatching the entire pack in one go. Wolfie's eyes widened in panic. This human is way too strong. I need to warn the boss. But as he turned to flee, he realized he was running straight toward a cliff. However, he was still hit by the spell, and he let out a pained howl, hoping Big Boss could hear him. Deep in his cave, Snaky heard Wolfie's howl. He wondered if it was the snake hunters again. Quickly, he uncoiled the little white snake from around him and placed her near the rainbow tree. He tells her to stay here no matter what happens, and never come out. He didn't want to fight inside his own cave, so he needed to lure them away. But he was still unsure how strong are the humans this time. As Snaky made his way out of the cave, he extended his spiritual sense, and immediately collided with another, and they both knew each other's location. The disciple was now sure it was just a snake demon. He sent a message to his master and then began moving quickly towards Snaky's location. He watched Snaky slithering away at a very slow pace. However, he didn't let his guard down. From what Zhao, his senior brother, had told him, This snake was pretty slippery and powerful enough to beat their senior brother. All of a sudden he yelled out how he didn't even need to call his master over, and he will deal with Snakey alone. Snakey glanced back and rolled his eyes. This guy thinks he's clever, huh? His spiritual sense confirmed that this human's cultivation level was the same as the senior brother he'd encountered before, but his speed? Way worse. He's just putting on a show, and he even said his master isn't coming. That's basically screaming that his master is on the way. Snakey ain't stupid, nor does he want to take any chances. Without hesitation, he activated his Earth Escape spell. When the human saw Snakey suddenly accelerate, he cursed under his breath and cast a spell, sending a wave of energy crashing into the ground. Snakey felt the tremor behind him but smirked, knowing the guy was getting desperate. But the spell is barely half as strong as his fireball. Frustrated, the man also used an Earth Escape spell to pursue Snakey underground. He hurled taunts as he closed in, telling Snakey to fight him head-on. This was all part of Snakey's plan. He suddenly veered off to the side, changing direction. Snakey suddenly burst out of the ground, just as the man came charging toward him. The sudden appearance caught the man off guard, and he couldn't stop in time. The man quickly used a spell, thinking Snakey was underestimating him. But Snakey was ready. From his storage pouch, he pulled out a talisman, a counter specifically designed to neutralize lightning spells. As soon as the man's attack collided with the talisman, it triggered a massive explosion, sending the man back onto the surface. Just then, Snakey shot out a fireball from his mouth. The man's eyes widened in panic as he scrambled to retrieve something from his pouch. It was a life-protecting jade amulet. He quickly activated it, but it wasn't fast enough. The shield only partially covered his body. The flames engulfed him, searing through his robes. He let out a blood-curdling scream as the intense heat scorched his flesh. Snakey observed the aftermath of his fireball. This was the kind of move he shouldn't have been able to pull off until after reaching Foundation establishment. But thanks to the fire-type herbs he'd consumed earlier, his fireball spell had undergone a significant upgrade. As the smoke cleared, he saw the man lying on the ground, one of his arms blown clean off. The human groaned in agony, trying to drag himself away. Snakey hissed, slithering closer, setting his eye on the man's storage pouch. Just as he was about to grab it, someone approached in the distance. The man cried out for his master to save him. Snakey's instincts screamed at him to flee. One glance at this old man was enough to tell this guy was trouble, so Snakey quickly bolted the other way. Chen waved a hand, snuffing out the surrounding flames, and tossed a healing pill to his disciple, telling him to heal while he will handle the rest. Snakey darted through the forest as fast as he could, keeping tabs on Chen's position with his spiritual sense. This guy's definitely a peak chi refining cultivator. No way I can fight him. Behind him, Chen tells Snakey to stop running and surrender now, and he might spare Snakey's life. Snakey obviously didn't fall for it. Chen was quick to catch up, but Snakey had a trick up his sleeve. He dove underground using an Earth Escape spell, which surprised him. However, Snakey's escape hit a snag, literally. He slammed into a granite wall. This means he can't keep using the Earth Escape spell. While his tail was strong enough to break through the granite, it was far too slow, and Chen was closing in. Forced to change direction, Snakey shot upward, bursting out onto the surface. Ahead of him was a sheer cliff face, and an idea sparked in his mind. As Chen emerged from the ground moments later, a flurry of rocks began falling from the cliff. Reacting quickly, Chen cast a protective spell. But Snakey wasn't done. He had already plastered several explosive talismans onto the cliffside. The explosion sent chunks of rock raining down, burying Chen beneath a mountain of rubble. Snakey paused to catch his breath, thinking this should keep him trapped for a while. Underneath the pile of rocks, Chen gritted his teeth. Earth Escape spell didn't work here, and the sheer weight of the rocks above made it impossible to push either. And in such a cramped space, using powerful spells risked harming himself. This left him no choice but to pull out a treasured pill left to him by his sex ancestor. It was a desperate move, but he had no choice. Swallowing it, he channeled its power, giving up 20 years of his lifespan to forcefully boost him to the Foundation establishment level. Chen erupted from the rubble. The air around him crackled as he yelled out that he would skin Snakey alive. He then clutched the artifact and quickly scanned for Snakey's position. Snakey heard the enraged roar and activated his spiritual sense. What he felt made his blood run cold. Not only did the man break free, but he also broke through to the Foundation establishment. Sweat dripped from Snakey's scales as he slithered even faster. He raced toward the river, but he wasn't fast enough. Within moments, Chen caught up and cast a gravity spell, pinning Snakey to the ground. Snakey struggled, feeling the weight on his body. The spell was so powerful that he couldn't move a muscle. Chen approached slowly as he blamed Snakey for the deaths of all his disciples and plans to kill Snakey because of it. But Snakey knew they were the ones who came for the serpent fruit, and now the old bastard is calling him the bad guy? But thinking about this won't help him, and he needs to act fast. With all his strength, Snakey reached into his storage pouch and pulled out one of his golden scales. With a quick flick of his tail, he hurled it at Chen. Chen sneered, calling it a pointless trick. He used a gravity spell, but soon realized it wasn't working. He quickly dodged, only to find the golden scale was powerful enough to graze through his defensive aura. Snakey didn't waste the opportunity. With the gravity spell gone, he dived into the river-activated water escape spell and quickly got away. But he knew better than to think he was safe. He'll catch up in no time. I need a place to hide. But where? As he swam, an idea struck him. The temple. That's his lucky place, with the mountain god always protecting him. On the other side, Chen followed Snakey's trail all the way to the mountain god temple. When he arrived, he immediately noticed it was a dead end. His years of experience made him cautious. He knew Snakey was slippery. Could there be a trap? Standing outside the temple, he bellowed for Snakey to come out, even threatening to tear this place apart if he didn't. Inside, Snakey was sprawled on the collapsed mountain god statue, panting and muttering prayers. Mountain god, if you're real, now's the time to show up and help me. I'll even bring you offerings. He needed a moment to catch his breath and recover some spiritual energy. If it had to come down life and death situation, even if he had to rip out all his golden scales, he would still fight the old bastard to the death. Outside, Chen was growing impatient. Seeing no response, he pulled out a handful of explosive talismans and tossed all of it at the temple. Oh no, he's lost it! He's actually blowing up the temple! Snakey's eyes widened in panic as explosions ripped through the building. The temple quickly crumbled with the roof collapsing and debris flying everywhere. Snakey was buried under the rubble. However, he noticed something strange. A shadow began forming, followed by a thunderous voice echoing, questioning, who dares destroy his temple and desecrate his statue? Chen froze in place, trembling as the shadow loomed before him. When the shadow asked why wasn't he responding, was he deaf or something? Chen's heart sank further. He wondered if this was some sort of legendary primordial spirit. His body shook uncontrollably. He wanted to flee, but can he even pull it off? Just then, his disciple arrived. But what he didn't expect was his master used a gravity spell on him and hurled him toward the shadow. He didn't even have time to process anything before being completely engulfed by the shadow, draining his life force in an instant. Chen didn't even look back. Activating a swift movement talisman, he bolted into the forest. Just as he wondered why is such a powerful being here in the forest, an unbearable pain struck his chest. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and he heard a chilling voice telling him if he dared return here, his soul would scatter into the void, and he will never reincarnate. Meanwhile, the shadow turned its attention to the disciple's lifeless body, commenting on it being a good vessel. Snakey cautiously poked his head out, saying that was way too close. But good thing the mountain god actually came to the rescue. But suddenly he saw the disciple standing up, and worse, the disciple suddenly snapped his head, looking straight at him. Without hesitation, he unleashed several fireballs. The flames engulfed the body, reducing it to ashes. Only when there was nothing left but a charred rib bone did Snakey let out a relieved sigh. He grabbed the burnt rib and bowed towards the ruined temple. "Thank you, great mountain god. I'll come back every year to make offerings to you, I swear." But before he could leave, the shadow appeared again, floating ominously above him. "What in the world is in that tiny brain of yours?" it snapped, jabbing Snakey's head with its fingers. Snakey was confused, thinking that the mountain god didn't want his offerings. Hearing this, the shadow looked like it was about to burst. The shadow then says how Snakey ruined his plan, but then gave him a chance to fix it. He gave Snakey very little time to find him a suitable body. He emphasized it has to be strong, young, and handsome, or else he will curse Snakey to never reincarnate. Snakey was so terrified that his jaw dropped in horror. Not daring to argue, Snakey spun around and darted into the forest, muttering to himself about the terrifying curse. As he slithered away, the shadow shouted after him, saying he wanted a strong and handsome body, don't bring him anything ugly and weak. As Snakey slithered away into the forest, the shadow knew he needed to find a temporary vessel, or else his spirit would dissipate. And this poor rat who's been living in the temple became his only option. He sat on a rock, lamenting how he, the the once feared heavenly demon wanderer after hundreds of years, only to be thwarted by such a meddlesome snake. His thoughts drifted back hundreds of years ago when he was nearly killed by the sects pursuing him. He had barely escaped, leaving him only his spirit soul, hiding inside the mountain god statue and sealing his soul inside, sustained by the faint energy of the statue's worshippers. For decades, he patiently waited for the perfect moment to possess a new body. That moment almost came a few months ago, when two humans had stumbled into the temple, just as he began attaching his soul onto the human, and somehow even absorbed a tiny fragment of his soul in the process, which helped Snakey unlocking intelligence. A few days later, there was another chance. But this time, Snakey crushed the guy's skull, and worse, a wild dog came along and ate the body with a tiny bit of his soul, causing it to gain intelligence as well. And now, just as he thought the snake was gone for good, Snakey returned once again, only for some lunatic to blow up the temple and his statue. As that wasn't bad enough, when he finally found the best vessel in years, only to have Snakey burned it to ashes once again. He swore that once he got a body, he'd make sure to teach that snake a lesson. Meanwhile, Snakey had its own problems. After searching for a while, there are only human skeletons. Frustrated, he slapped his head. Time was running out. Just then, he heard something in the distance. Thinking it was a burial, Snakey approached. But to its surprise, there was a dog digging the grave. What surprised him the most was the dog was reeked of dark energy. Soon, the dog opened the coffin, revealing the body of a young human male. Snakey moved closer, causing the dog to look in his direction. The dog clearly had some intelligence too, and assumed the snake was here to fight over the corpse. But somehow, it looks like the snake is more interested in him rather than the corpses. Sensing danger, the dog panicked and started running, while yelling that the snake demon wanted to kill him. To Snakey, this was clearly the young, strong, and handsome vessel the mountain god was looking for. Snakey tossed beast-taming rope to drag the dog back. The dog barked desperately, warning Snakey if he didn't let him go, he would bite him. Snakey tells him to shut up, which scares the dog into begging for mercy. Soon, Snakey dragged the dog back to the mountain god temple. Meanwhile, the little rat kicked a stone on the ground, feeling Snakey was taking too long. The rat's body was about to collapse, and he urgently needed to find a new one to possess. Just then, he heard the snake's excited voice shouting, saying he found the perfect body. The snake proudly shoved the dog in front of him, saying this was the exact body the mountain god was looking for. He stared at the dog, stunned for a moment, before angrily yelling at Snakey. Snakey was confused, believing he just followed the mountain god's exact instructions. He didn't even bother explaining, and soon shadows came out of the rat's crumbling body and lunged at Snakey. Since he didn't have much time left, possessing this dumb snake seemed like a better option than a dog. But every time he tried to enter Snakey's body, he was thrown out. After several failed attempts, he realized with frustration that the snake's spiritual senses were stronger than he thought. Just then, a surge of dark energy caught his attention. He turned and saw that it was coming from the dog. The familiar aura made him excited, as this was the demonic physique he once had as well. He quickly possessed the dog, and suddenly power started flowing through him. Sure enough, this was the same demonic physique as his own in the past. As he adjusted to his new body, he started sifting through the dog's memories. It turned out that this dog was the one who had eaten the 3 corpses from the other day. Ever since gaining intelligence, the dog had been devouring dead bodies, which eventually formed this dark aura. Noticing the beast-taming rope around his neck, with a casual tug, he ripped it off effortlessly. Snakey was stunned. Not only did the mountain god plan to possess him, but now he's taken over the dog, and even the rope isn't working. But before Snakey can slither away, the dog tells him to stop and says he wants to take Snakey as a disciple. Raising his paw, he declared becoming the disciple of the great heavenly demon wanderer is the greatest honor of Snakey. As the paw smacked down on its head, Snakey realized this wasn't the real mountain god after all. Snakey glared at him. The mountain god he's been worshipping all this time was a fraud? He asked him, how dare he pretend to be a god, questioning if he isn't afraid of karma or going to hell when he dies. The dog let out a cold smirk, saying hell is just a fairy tale for weaklings to comfort themselves. He then took the original black dog as an example, saying how the dog would dig graves and steal corpses, clearly not afraid of karma, and that's the kind truly worthy of the legacy of the heavenly demon wanderer. Little Snakey didn't really understand what he meant by wanderer, nor did he really want to know. Not long after, Snakey returned to Iron Bear Mountain and slipped into his cave. The dog followed, quickly noticing another hidden tunnel deeper inside, and pointed out that it was Snaky's real hideout. In the end, Snaky doesn't agree to be his disciple, but can't stop the dog from following him because no matter how fast he runs, the dog easily catches up. Snaky couldn't figure out how strong this wanderer guy really was, but ever since he possessed the dog, his attitude toward him wasn't as hostile as before. Just then, Wolfie arrived with a goat in his mouth. Looks like when Wolfie fell off the cliff, he didn't die, only had its tail burnt. Wolfie is here to offer today's meal, and Snaky quickly swallowed the goat in one bite. But the dog wasn't happy, telling Snaky he should be sharing this with his teacher. Snaky shook his head and replied, "Wolves eat meat, but dogs eat." Well, you know, telling him to ask Wolfie to give him a pile if he was hungry. The dog growled angrily and lunged at the Wolfie, who yelped in terror and hid behind Snaky. Surprisingly, the dog wasn't even mad. Instead, he chuckled. Says it's been ages since someone dared to insult him like this, but questions if Snaky knows what happens when a disciple disrespects their teacher. Snaky rolled his eyes and reasoned that wasn't a disrespect, because everyone knows dogs love eating that stuff. The dog ignored him and insisted that he is Snaky's teacher, reasoned that not only he helped Snaky back in the temple, Snaky also bowed to him many times before, and that clearly counts as a ceremony, which made him his teacher. Snaky realized the argument sounded surprisingly logical, but then he quickly snapped out of it. He wasn't about to fall for that. He activated his water escape spell, trying to flee, but the dog chased him down effortlessly, laughing as he went, saying, "This is the most fun he had in years." Back at the real hideout, the little white snake was diligently practicing her cultivation. She had already learned basic breathing techniques and looked quite focused. Meanwhile, Snaky took out a storage pouch he had snatched earlier, clutched it tightly, and tells the dog to stay back. The dog clicks his tongue, saying Snaky is treating trash as treasure. After emptying the storage pouch, the contents were similar to the senior disciple's belongings, except there was a spirit stone and a furnace. The dog was surprised to see a spirit stone, but Snaky quickly grabbed it and reminded what the dog said to him earlier. In the end, he was just trying to steal it. Feeling slightly embarrassed, the dog backed off, saying he was just curious and he didn't care about it at all, though his wagging tail betrayed how badly he wanted it. The jade slip inside the pouch didn't contain cultivation techniques, but rather methods for alchemy. The little white snake immediately coiled around the alchemy furnace, looking absolutely smitten with it. Soon, Snaky resumed his cultivation. He still remembered how the old man's gravity spell could strike him from such a long distance. He needed to train harder to be able to do that as well. Meanwhile, Wolfie continued delivering meals daily, and today's offering was a wild boar. The dog perched in a tree, watching with a smirk, telling Snaky if he kept eating this stuff, it would take him ages to break through. He even teased, saying even a dog would shake its head at this junk. Snaky rolled his eyes and asked him what have he been eating. The dog puffed out his chest and proudly replied, "Demon beasts and herbs, of course." Snaky retorted that there's no demon beasts in the mountain anymore. The only one close would be Wolfie, but eating him wouldn't give much benefit. Hearing this, Wolfie let out a soft whimper, not sure if it was fear or protest. The dog scoffed, saying that's why Snaky need to venture out. Staying here means he will never get the good stuff. To prove his point, he showed Snaky a storage ring he had acquired yesterday and revealed his lunch for the day. He then pulls out a late-stage demon beast. The dog explained, "This is a spirit-tailed chicken raised by a human sect nearby. Much tastier than wild animals, which he grabbed too when he was passing by." Hearing this, Snaky immediately panicked, calling him crazy, saying if the humans find out and track him down, then they're all doomed. The dog waved a paw dismissively, telling him to relax, and explained that he always cleaned up after himself, so no one will ever track him down. He then began plucking the chicken, grinning as he said, "Look at how plump this bird is." Snaky couldn't help but drool because it really does look delicious. After finding a few sticks, the dog then roasted the chicken over a fire. The sound of sizzling fat dripping onto the flames, combined with the mouth-watering aroma, made Snaky's stomach growl. The dog smirked, just waiting for Snaky to fall for it. He then tells Snaky if he wants a bite, he'd have to trade him for his spirit stone. Even the little white snake was quickly lured in by the delicious smell. Snaky and Wolfie began drooling, but there was no way Snaky was giving up his precious spirit stones. Playing tough, he declared he'd rather starve than eat that roasted chicken. Meanwhile, the dog kept up the act, tearing off a drumstick and dramatically blowing on it, talking about how juicy it was. He took a big bite, then casually tossed the bone to Snakey, telling him to try it. Snakey turned his head, acting uninterested. But then, the dog ripped off another drumstick and shoved it right in his face. Feeling annoyed, Snakey suddenly spat a fireball at him. The dog easily dodged and smirked, telling Snakey to not get mad because he is his teacher, and he promised to never scam him. He even mentioned that the spirit-tailed chicken was worth at least 3 spirit stones. Snakey shot back, saying if it's that valuable, why don't he sell it himself? The dog claimed it wasn't convenient for him right now and patted the snake on the head, then tells him to look around. Sure enough, Wolfie and the little white snake, just from gnawing on the bones, had both broken through, one advancing to the 3rd level, the other to the 2nd. The dog explained that this was the power of the spirit-tailed chicken. Tempted, Snakey finally gave in, pulling out his spirit stones and demanding an honest trade. Once the deal was done, he wasted no time, swallowing the chicken whole without even bothering to cook it. Instantly, warmth surged through his body. Damn, it's so yummy, he thought. His cauldron kicked into overdrive, absorbing energy non-stop. In the blink of an eye, he broke through to the 5th level. Satisfied, he let out a burp and thought, wow, that was amazing. Later, he spent a few days under the rainbow tree refining the chicken's energy. By the time he was done, he had reached the peak of the 5th level and even grown a few golden scales. It turned out the dog wasn't lying. The chicken was worth every spirit stone. As everyone else focused on their own breakthroughs, Snakey couldn't help but think that maybe the dog actually knew what he was doing. Opening his eyes, the dog asked, "So, how was it?" Snakey, pretending not to care, replied, "It was all right." But then the dog dangled another tempting offer. They should team up to catch more chickens. He promised Snakey could reach the late stages of enlightenment within a month and the peak of it within a year. Snakey almost gave in but hesitated. It sounded too good to be true. After all, these chickens were late-stage demon beasts. The dog scoffed, claiming these chickens weren't real beasts anymore. They've been domesticated for so long they've lost their fighting edge. Even mid-stage demon beasts are tougher than them. Snakey wasn't convinced, recalling the time he was nearly killed by a boar demon. He shared the story, but the dog was baffled and questioned him. What kind of boar could possibly be that strong? Not rushing, the dog shrugged and said, if that's the case, he will go alone. But if someone chases him, he will run straight back here. Snakey was shocked and called him shameless mutt. The dog patted him on the head and reassured Snakey that he would be safe if he just stuck with him and that he should trust his teacher. Reluctantly, Snakey agreed to tag along, but on one condition: no more calling him a disciple. He wanted to be addressed by his name. The dog rolled his eyes and said, "Snakey is an awful name, but it's better than nothing." Snakey shot back, saying it's still better than Wanderer Man or whatever. The dog was offended, so he educated Snakey that he was the one and only world-famous heavenly demon wanderer, known for his fearsome reputation. Snakey smirked and said, "Sounds exactly like a villain." Deciding not to argue further, he also knew he couldn't be using that name right now. Since he's dark in color, he will go with Black Emperor. Snakey burst out laughing and began teasing him, and the two kept bickering as they journeyed onward. Soon, they reached the Xiao Yao sect. The dog asked if Snakey knew how many sects were in the entire Chu kingdom. Snakey shook his head as he only knew about the snake-hunting sect. He then asked, "Are there other human sects that also hunt snakes?" The dog face-palmed and began explaining. There are 5 major sects. Up north, there's the Snowfield sect. To the west is Kunlun. East is Penglai. The south is the snake-hunting sect. And the central region is run by the imperial court. All the smaller sects in the kingdom answer to these 5. It turned out the snake-hunting sect was once called the Dragon Tamer sect, but it fell from grace and changed its name to avoid drawing attention. Their current target, the Xiao Yao sect, was a small fry under the snake-hunting sect's jurisdiction, with only 5 lowly Foundation establishment cultivators. Snakey nodded thoughtfully. 5 Foundation establishments, he repeated. Then, in a flash, he bolted, only to be caught by the tail. He hissed, "Let me go! I'm not going in there! That's no different than suicide!" The dog shook his head, calling him a coward. Then he pointed to a nearby slope and tells him that's where one of the elders keeps their spirit-tailed chickens. At the mention of food, Snakey reconsidered. He slithered closer to take a look. To his surprise, there were over 100 chickens roaming freely. He wondered, are the humans not afraid these chickens will run away? The dog grinned, telling him to go catch one and find out. Snakey activated his spiritual sense, only to feel it blocked by some sort of barrier. Alarmed, he hissed, "There's something dangerous here." The dog pulled him back, saying it's just a magical array. The dog then pulled out a small pouch of powder. Curious, Snakey asked, "What is that?" The dog sprinkled some over the magic array, explaining, "Array-breaking powder. It's perfect for disabling simple traps like this one." Then, he released a few oversized spirit worms, the chicken's favorite food. Sure enough, the chickens flocked over, pecking at the worms. Meanwhile, the two of them used Earth Escape to burrow underground, inching closer to their targets. The dog whispered, "Grab as many as he can and run." Snaky acted fast, using a beast taming rope to snag 2 chickens. The dog, not to be outdone, caught a few more. But before he could call out to Snaky to retreat, he realized the little guy had already run far away. Just as the dog was about to leave, a human voice called out behind him, "Well, well, well, so this is why my chickens have been disappearing lately." Snaky was sweating bullets while having a full-on panic attack. Oh wait, I almost forgot snakes can't sweat. Either way, he urged Doggo to run as fast as he could, but Doggo wasn't the least bit rushed. Instead, he calmly tucked the spirit-tailed chickens back into his storage ring, brushing it off like this was just another walk in the park. The next moment, he used his Earth Escape technique and bolted in the opposite direction. The old man chasing them raised an eyebrow, thinking the dog must have stolen this technique somewhere. With a casual flick of his dust whisk, he turned the dirt beneath Doggo's paws into solid stone. Doggo froze, staring at the ground and grumbling, "Well, so much for that plan." Without missing a beat, he decided to switch tactics. The old man's eyes nearly popped out of his head when Doggo simply took off on foot, just like a human, zigzagging through the forest. Doggo figured the old geezer couldn't possibly keep up. The old man scrambled after him, muttering something about how Doggo's movements didn't resemble anything like a typical dog demon. "What in the world is this thing?" he cursed, huffing as he chased. Meanwhile, Snaky peeked out from behind a tree, only half his little head showing. He sighed in relief, saying, "Good thing I ran first," shivering as he thought, "Real Foundation establishment cultivators are terrifying." As for Doggo, good luck to him. Snaky got bigger things to focus on. With that, Snaky slithered off to find a hidden spot. In a secluded cave, Snaky finally relaxed. Believing this place is hidden enough, he sets 3 spirit-tailed chickens in front of him. It was time to cook them up and refine their energy. Dreaming big, he imagined breaking through the 6th level, maybe even hitting its peak. As these thoughts bubbled in his mind, so did his mouth water. He started roasting the chickens, his tail wagging with excitement. But cooking turned out to be harder than expected. The first chicken ended up burnt to a crisp, and Snaky was left chewing on the charred meat. He tried to mimic the way Doggo cooked, but it was clear the technique wasn't as simple as it looked. Tears welled up in his eyes, lamenting that too bad Doggo is gone forever now. Just as he was about to start cooking another chicken, a familiar voice came from the entrance of the cave. Snaky turned and saw Doggo standing there. Doggo casually made his way inside, sat down beside a stone, and scratched his nuts as he explained that he had gone through great trouble to lure the old man away, even sacrificing 3 spirit-tailed chickens, which he complained had made all his efforts feel wasted. Snaky was silent for a moment, then quietly handed Doggo a half-roasted chicken and one that was still intact. Doggo gave him a curious look. Snaky explained that if it hadn't been for Doggo drawing the old man away, he wouldn't have been able to get the chickens. Since they had agreed to split the spoils, it was only fair for Doggo to take his share. Doggo didn't respond immediately, but stared at Snaky for a long moment. Then, he burst into laughter, remarking that Snaky was nothing like the kind of disciple he thought he had trained. Snaky bristled at the comment, and quickly clarified that he had never admitted to being Doggo's disciple. Snaky, though reluctant to share, did what he thought was right. He handed over the chickens, and Doggo chuckled, taking only the charred one, then decided to teach Snaky how to cook properly, and right now, he needed to borrow Snaky's tail. With that, Doggo pulled out a pile of vegetables and used Snaky's sharp tail as a makeshift knife, slicing them into perfect pieces. He tossed the veggies and condiments into a pot, and soon, the water began to boil. Doggo explained to Snaky that chickens weren't just for roasting. They made an excellent soup, too. He adjusted the fire while stirring and even threw another chicken into the pot. As Snaky poured in more water, Doggo added a handful of medicinal herbs, declaring that this soup was now a powerhouse of nutrition. The aroma wafting from the pot was irresistible, and Snaky couldn't stop drooling. He kept pestering Doggo, asking if it was ready yet. Doggo finally smiled and told him it was good to go. Without hesitation, Snaky stuffed both chickens into his mouth and, using his gravity technique, slurped up the soup in one go. Between bites and gulps, he kept mumbling about how delicious it was. After finishing the lovely dinner, Snaky was so full he could barely move. A while later, he mustered enough energy to begin refining. Doggo sprawled lazily on a nearby rock, waved him off, and told him to go ahead. As Snaky left, Doggo chuckled to himself. He thought about how his silly little disciple had no idea the chicken he said he had lost all ended up in his belly. Sharing one chicken with him and even thanking him, how adorably naive. On the other hand, Snaky began his cultivation. As the cauldron absorbed the energy, he felt the power surge, convinced he was about to break through to the 6th level in one go. But then, the energy suddenly dispersed. He frowned, confused that this didn't make sense. The last time he ate spirit tail chicken broke through immediately. Maybe, he thought, the chickens weren't fully refined. Unwilling to give up, Snaky tried again, but the result was the same. He started to suspect that his foundation might be unstable because the last breakthrough had happened too quickly. Doggo, observing Snaky's frustration, decided to step in. He grabbed the huge wok and spun it in the air, using his tiny paws to gather the residue of the medicinal herbs inside. With precise control, he condensed the remnants into a small pellet, heating it with flames until it became a solid pill. Snaky watched in awe, but before he could say a word, Doggo stuffed the pill into his mouth, telling him this would help him break through blocked energy channels. Wait the second. Did he wash his paw? Because, well anyways, the pill tasted awful, with a burnt aftertaste. But Snaky had no choice but to trust Doggo. Moments later, he attempted his breakthrough again. This time, the energy surged smoothly, and with a powerful jolt, Snaky finally succeeded. We fast forward 10 days later. By now, Snaky has reached the peak of the 6th level. He was still busy practicing his gravity technique while Doggo sat nearby. Doggo teased him, asking if he believed him now. Snaky, feeling a bit embarrassed, reluctantly admitted that Doggo had been right. He added, although he appreciated everything, he swore he'd never steal chickens again, no matter the circumstances. After leaving the cave, Doggo stretched lazily and remarked that they couldn't keep stealing from the same place all the time. Perhaps it was time to find a new place. Snaky, however, shook his head. He thought there was no need to rush. Even though he had just broken through a level, his physical strength hadn't improved much. He didn't even shed his skin, and he only gained one extra golden scale. Snaky reasoned that while humans focused on cultivating spiritual energy, he should prioritize strengthening his own body. Lose sight of that in the pursuit of quick results was a big no-no. Before Doggo could respond, the two froze as their eyes fixed on a horrifying sight ahead. Not far from them, thick smoke billowed into the sky, and flames engulfed the forest. Without hesitation, Snaky darted toward the flames. Doggo, alarmed, chased after him, shouting that he must have a death wish running straight into a wildfire. Doggo tried to convince him it was just an ordinary mountain fire, but Snaky insisted it wasn't. Tears streamed down Snaky's face as he demanded to know who could have done such a thing. Doggo had never seen him so distraught and tried to calm him down, but Snaky shouted that he couldn't stay calm. This was his home. Meanwhile, the culprits stood some distance away, admiring what they had created. One of them, Chen, remarked that the fire should burn for 7 days, more than enough time to destroy the snake demon's lair. His eyes glinted with hatred as he explained that he had only 3 years of life left. His one remaining grudge in this lifetime was to skin that snake demon, extract its tendons, and refine its snake core into a pill. His final disciple tried to console him, assuring Chen that his wish would come true. Chen sighed, his thoughts shifting to his disciple's future. While he was here to take revenge, he also wanted to do something else. A senior elder from their sect's headquarters had shown interest in the area, and the sect planned to establish a branch nearby. Chen explained that once the branch was established, his disciples would gain access to better training resources. The young man grew excited, thinking about how the branch hall could not only raise the local level of cultivation, but also bring prosperity to the surrounding villages and towns. Curious, he asked his master who the visiting elder was. Chen looked up while saying that the person was a powerful cultivator in the core formation stage. Elsewhere, a man in white robes strolled leisurely through the air, completely unfazed by the raging flames below. This was Xuan Yangzi. His focus wasn't on the fire, but on the land itself. He observed the terrain and mused that it was flat enough to build a city, awarding it 8 points. Next, he examined the mountain springs, deeming them suitable for raising spirit birds, which earned 5 points. When he reached the rivers, he noted their potential for establishing a medicinal herb garden, giving them 7 points. However, the mountains themselves, which he found quite ugly, received only 3 points. The wildfire raged fiercely, spreading quickly and consuming everything in its path. It wasn't long before the flames reached Snaky's cave. Beneath the rainbow tree, the little white snake curled up in fear, trembling as Wolfie stood guard, growling low to protect her. Hearing the Wolfie's growls, Snaky shouted their names in panic. Doggo, trailing behind, was equally shocked. He hadn't expected the fire to reach this far. Without hesitation, Snaky uprooted the rainbow tree entirely. Then he activated an explosive talisman to blast a path through the fire. Snaky led the way while the two followed closely behind. Snaky even spat out water trying to extinguish the flame. But the water evaporated almost instantly. Snaky's mouth was dry from the heat, and Doggo, glancing at him, remarked that this small amount of water wasn't going to save the forest. The scorching temperature was taking its toll on Snaky. But Doggo explained that wildfires like this happened naturally from time to time, especially in hot weather, and suggested Snaky not overthink it. But Snaky was certain this was no accident. He pointed out that, as Doggo had mentioned before, the snake hunting sect often established branch halls in places rich in spiritual energy and snake resources. Doggo understood what Snaky was getting at. Clearly, there must be a prime location nearby that was perfect for a sect to settle. Snaky then brought up his birthplace, the Myriad Serpents Valley, a place where hundreds of thousands of snakes gathered every spring. Doggo finally connected the dots and realized the culprits were burning the mountain to clear the way for establishing a sect branch. But for such a task, they would need a foundation establishment, or even a core formation cultivator to oversee it. That realization made Snaky furious. He declared that he was going to find and kill whoever was responsible for this. Doggo quickly blocked Snaky's path, telling him not to lose his head now. He reminded Snaky of his usual cautious nature, and suggested focusing on cultivation instead of acting rashly. Snaky took a deep breath to calm himself, but then noticed something up ahead. Doggo turned to look, and immediately noticed a powerful cultivator not too far away. Doggo gauged the distance, and estimated the person was about 30 miles away. Snaky asked what their cultivation level might be, and Doggo, smirking, noted that at least Snaky no longer dove underground at the mere mention of human cultivators. But when Doggo revealed that the figure was at the core formation stage, Snaky instantly burrowed into the ground, leaving only half of his head exposed. Doggo clicked his tongue in annoyance and teased Snaky for being so cowardly. He added that he hadn't finished explaining yet. The figure was just a clone, not the cultivator's true body. Doggo elaborated that clones varied in strength. Some were almost as powerful as the original, while others were as weak as mere chi refinement. Before Doggo could finish his explanation, the clone suddenly changed direction, as if it had sensed something. Snaky realized the person had picked up their presence and nervously asked if they should start running. Doggo reassured him to stay put and activated a concealment talisman, boasting that even a golden immortal wouldn't be able to detect them now. Moments later, Xuan Yangzi appeared directly above them. He scanned the area and commented dryly that the concealment technique he sensed only deserved 2 points. He remarked there was no need to hide, then aimed a powerful strike at a high point nearby. The sheer force of the attack made Snaky tremble uncontrollably. Doggo tried to calm him, explaining that the clone was merely probing. He didn't know their exact location, and was trying to bluff them out. Despite his confident tone, the bead of cold sweat dripping down Doggo's forehead suggested he wasn't entirely sure. Snaky, still shaking, whispered that Doggo had claimed even a golden immortal wouldn't sense them. Doggo admitted sheepishly that Golden Immortal was the name of his former pet. The clone's strike created a large crater, but nothing was revealed. Xuan Yangzi hesitated, wondering if he had been mistaken or if the quality of this particular clone was simply subpar. After a moment of contemplation, he decided to head toward the Myriad Serpents Valley instead. As the person disappeared into the distance, Snaky finally let out a sigh of relief. Doggo, on the other hand, smirked and asked if Snaky had noticed the storage bag hanging from the clone's waist. Snaky, horrified, cut him off immediately. reminding him that this was a core formation cultivator they were dealing with. Doggo waved him off, confidently stating that the clone over there should be quite weak since it didn't spot them. Noting there's a 50% chance of taking him down, Doggo proposed they split the spoils 50-50. After all, this was the clone of a core formation cultivator. Imagine how many spirit stones could be in that storage bag. Snaky, however, was not convinced. He argued that even if they defeated the clone, the original cultivator would surely seek revenge, and he had no desire to make an enemy of such a person. Just as he was about to retreat, Doggo asked him if he didn't want revenge. His home, after all, had just been reduced to ashes. Snaky fell silent. Sensing an opportunity, Doggo crept closer, whispering in his ear, asking, didn't he hate what had been done to him? Did he really want to live the rest of his life as a homeless coward? Snaky hesitated, but a 50% chance wasn't nearly enough for him. He tipped out his collection of golden scales and asked Doggo if these would increase their odds. Doggo's eyes sparkled as he examined the shimmering scales, then claimed their chances had jumped to 70%, then quickly corrected himself to 80%. With some clever strategy, he insisted, they could push it beyond 90%. Before setting off, Snaky found the little white snake and Wolfie hiding nearby. He explained the situation, instructing them to retreat to a neighboring mountain and find a safe, hidden place to cultivate. He promised to return for them once everything was settled. As they left, Doggo secretly infused them with a bit of his own soul. He thought that since fate had brought them together, he might as well give them a small gift. Whether or not they could unlock its potential would be up to them. On the other side, Zhuan Yangzi had arrived at the Myriad Serpents Valley. He was thoroughly impressed, giving the valley a perfect 10, saying this place was an ideal breeding ground. He couldn't imagine a more perfect location for a sect branch. Just as he was preparing to leave and report his findings, a sudden surge of energy caught his attention. Turning toward the source, he spotted someone drawing a magic array. Without hesitation, he hurled an explosive talisman toward it but was easily dodged. Using a gravity technique, he pulled the figure into view and was surprised to see it was just a dog. He demanded to know where the dog's master was. Doggo, however, began to swell unnaturally. His eyes widened in alarm just as the dog exploded, forcing him to dodge the blast. Though he escaped unharmed, he felt unsettled. He even wondered if he had wandered into an illusion array, suspecting there was a powerful cultivator nearby. Deciding it was best to report back to headquarters, he prepared to leave. But before he could act, Doggo's exploded body suddenly reformed and leaped onto his back. He was stunned, struggling to comprehend how was this even possible. Whether this was an illusion or not, it was already too late. Doggo, using the golden scales, sliced through his neck. The next moment, the man's head fell clean off, tumbling through the air. Doggo was surprised at how easy it was, but his relief was short-lived. The headless body reached out and grabbed him by the throat. In a calm voice, the man remarked that losing his head was hardly an issue for a wooden clone. He coldly added that Doggo's tactics deserved no more than a 6 out of 10, barely passing. Doggo found himself tricked, but he wasn't about to give up. With one swipe of his paw, he twisted the headless body's arm into a knot. This wasn't exactly their original plan. He assumed the man was just a low-tier paper clone to scout the area, believing that chopping off the head would finish the job. Snaky had worried earlier, wondering what would happen if it wasn't a paper clone. Wouldn't that put Doggo in danger? Doggo had laughed at the time, bragging about his keen eye and saying he could recognize the type of clone from miles away. Now, recalling their earlier conversation, Doggo couldn't help but curse Snaky for being such a jinx. Frustrated, he let out a loud shout into the distance. In an instant, several streaks of golden light zipped through the air, piercing the body of the clone. The detached head twitched in realization. Doggo was nothing more than bait. At that moment, Snaky burst out of the ground, sinking his fangs into the severed head. Without missing a beat, he unleashed a fireball, engulfing it in flames. The person was shocked that he hadn't sensed anything below the ground until now. As the head was reduced to ashes, he mused that their teamwork deserved a perfect 10. Doggo, however, was less enthusiastic. He collapsed onto the ground, rubbing his head and groaning. It turned out the clone was the wooden level, not a paper one. He muttered about how expensive wooden clones were and how ridiculous it was to use one for reconnaissance. When Doggo glanced over at Snaky, he noticed he was still spitting fire in frustration. Alarmed, Doggo quickly told him to stop before he accidentally started another wildfire. Snakey flicked his tail in annoyance, then turned toward Doggo, staring at him intently. Doggo thought Snakey was worried about him, only to be asked, "This is your so-called 80% chance of success?" The two bickered back and forth, with Snakey collecting the golden scales scattered on the ground and chomping them down as he grumbled about how Doggo was always full of hot air. Doggo, unfazed, pulled out a jade slip and pointed out that if he hadn't intercepted it, the information inside would have been sent back, and they'd be in deep trouble. Snakey, ever cautious, told Doggo to destroy it immediately. With a few well-placed fireballs, the jade slip was reduced to ashes. Doggo looked at the remains in surprise, commenting that Snakey's black flames were strong enough to destroy a jade slip. Snakey ignored the compliment, asking only if they were safe now. Although the message hadn't been sent, the core formation cultivator's original body would know exactly where the clone had been destroyed. It was only a matter of time before he came to investigate in person. Hearing this, Snakey froze for a moment before bolting into the distance. Doggo sighed in exasperation. He called after Snakey, telling him that the snake-hunting sect's influence was too widespread in this country. If they wanted to escape the inevitable hunt, their best bet would be to flee to the neighboring nation. Back at the snake-hunting sect headquarters, deep within a hidden cave, Xuan Yangzi suddenly opened his eyes. His wooden clone had been destroyed, and even the jade slip hadn't returned. Standing up, he said it was interesting to note that while the wooden clone's strength was average, its aura and spiritual sense were identical to his own. Whoever had taken it down not only saw through the disguise, but also dared to act against it. Intrigued, he called for Su Bei, one of his disciples. Su Bei addressed him respectfully as master, and Xuan Yangzi instructed him to take 5 inner hall disciples to investigate who had attacked his clone. Meanwhile, the pair were fleeing for their lives. They had already covered hundreds of miles, but the Qin kingdom Doggo had mentioned was still far away. Doggo estimated it would take several more days to reach the border. Snakey was starting to feel exhausted, having insisted on using his Earth escape technique instead of running on the surface. When Doggo asked why, Snakey explained that it was all part of his plan to train his physical strength. Eventually, they decided to rest for the night and found an abandoned cave. Snakey sighed with relief, thinking it was the perfect time to find something to eat. Doggo warned him not to sleep underground, but it was too late. Doggo sighed and dragged the unconscious Snakey into the cave before heading out to hunt for some food. The next morning, Snakey woke up feeling full of energy. Stretching his body, he realized that burrowing hundreds of miles had made him physically stronger than before. Excited, he decided it was time to check out the storage bag from the clone. When he tried to erase the spiritual senses on it, however, he found it impossible. Frustrated, he gave it another go, only to be thrown back. Rubbing the new lump on his head, Snakey finally realized how overwhelming the core formation cultivator's spiritual sense was. Unwilling to give up, Snakey prepared to forcefully tear the bag open. Doggo quickly stopped him, warning that doing so could damage whatever treasures were inside. He suggested handing the bag over, promising he'd be able to open it within 3 days. Snakey, suspicious of Doggo's motives, muttered that Doggo probably just wanted to swipe something for himself. Doggo scoffed, claiming he wasn't that kind of dog and only needed a bit of time to crack it open safely. 7 days later, the two finally arrived at the Qin Kingdom's border. They found a safe spot to rest and set up camp, bringing out their trusting wok to prepare dinner. Snakey told Doggo to handle the cooking while he went underground to train a bit more. As he dug deeper, Snakey noticed that the soil in this area was unusually hard, with layers of sand and rock beneath it. Perfect for training. Doggo warned him not to overdo it, saying he wouldn't rescue him if he got stuck. Snakey continued diving deeper. Where he had once only been able to burrow 300 feet, he now managed to triple the distance. Perhaps he could even push beyond that. Though he felt himself nearing his limit, he couldn't help but feel proud. His golden scales had increased again over the past few days, making it clear to him that the number of scales was directly tied to his physical strength. The stronger his body became, the more scales he would grow. Back on the surface, Snakey slithered up and asked if dinner was ready. Doggo, looking mildly annoyed, pointed to the pot and grumbled that he had already eaten. With a dramatic sigh, he tossed the storage bag to Snakey, claiming he had finally managed to open it but was now completely out of energy. Snakey pouted, reminding Doggo that he had bragged about cracking it in 3 days. Dumping out the contents of the bag, Snakey was immediately disappointed. There was barely anything inside. No spirit stones at all. He couldn't help but wonder how a core formation cultivator's storage bag could be so unimpressive, especially compared to the other two disciples' bags they had looted earlier. Curious, Snaky asked Doggo if he didn't want to check it out for himself. Doggo waved him off, saying the items inside were useless to him, and that Snaky could have them as a gift. Snaky said nothing, but his suspicious look was hard to miss. Doggo, catching on, quickly defended himself, asking how a master could possibly stoop so low as to steal from his disciple. Snaky, narrowing his eyes, called Doggo's name sharply. Then, with a dramatic flair, he opened his mouth wide and demanded Doggo hand over whatever he'd taken. Doggo immediately cracked under the pressure, blurting out, "Spirit stones? What spirit stones? I didn't take anything." His hasty denial only made Snaky angrier, as he hadn't even accused him yet. The two bickered until Doggo finally admitted there were 10 spirit stones in total. He reluctantly agreed to split them, handing Snaky half while muttering under his breath about how young Snaky was, and how he needed Doggo to save the rest for his future. Snaky rolled his eyes, ignoring Doggo's parental wisdom, and instead turned his attention to a jade slip from the bag. It seemed to contain instructions for crafting wooden clones. Doggo called it a waste of effort, and suggested Snaky forget about it. He explained that wooden clones were inefficient and not worth the trouble. Instead, Doggo recommended learning a superior type of technique, one where the clone could be even stronger than the owner himself. Snaky's eyes lit up with interest, but Doggo's expression darkened and clarified that he was referring to puppet techniques. He explained that puppet crafting was one of the 6 core arts of cultivation, and much more worthwhile to learn. Snaky was clearly confused, so Doggo took it upon himself to explain. He told Snaky that the #1 sect in the Qin Kingdom was the Heavenly Puppet Sect, renowned for its puppetry. According to rumors, their puppets were often stronger than their masters, feeling no pain, with bodies as tough as demon beasts. To top it off, the more powerful people could control hundreds of puppets at once. Hearing this, Snaky's eyes lit up with excitement. He imagined unleashing 100 puppets in battle, swarming any human cultivator in his path, and the thought of beating the shit out of them left him grinning ear to ear. Seeing Snaky lost in his daydreams, Doggo gave him a light smack on the head and told him to get some sleep since they had more traveling to do the next morning. As the sun rose, they reached a river called the Geese Falls River. As the name suggests, even geese will fall when trying to go across. The strong whirlpools in the water made it dangerous, even for cultivators trying to fly over. Snaky suggested swimming across, but Doggo warned him about the river's treacherous currents and decided they should just pay for a boat ride. At the dock, the ferryman suddenly heard a voice but couldn't see anyone speaking. Looking down, he spotted a tiny figure. It was a very short man who explained he didn't have silver and would pay with spirit stones instead. The ferryman, obviously agreed, welcomed him aboard with enthusiasm. Other passengers on the boat weren't as polite. Some mocked him for his height, their comments growing increasingly nasty. The next moment, the tiny man casually waved his hand, sending these guys flying into the distance like rag dolls. The remaining passengers stared in awe, realizing this was a cultivator. Doggo snorted inwardly, calling the mortals foolish. Snaky, however, nudged him, pointing out that Doggo himself had claimed they should keep a low profile, so why had he gone and stirred up trouble? Doggo brushed it off, but before he could respond, a sweet female voice rang out, announcing the arrival of Elder Joe. She mentioned that the Qin Kingdom's young prince was also aboard the boat. The old man nodded and thanked the girl for leading the way. Doggo froze. That voice sounded way too familiar. When he turned to look, his heart sank. It was none other than the old man from the Xiao Yao sect who looked after the chickens. Snaky panicked, but Doggo grabbed him and whispered for him to stay calm. They were in disguise, and as long as they didn't act suspiciously, they wouldn't be recognized. Snaky, still uneasy, questioned how Doggo hadn't sniffed out the old man before. Doggo rolled his eyes, asking who would remember the sour stench of some random old man. Unfortunately, the old man seemed to sense something familiar and turned to glance their way. Just as the pair tried to slip away, he called out to them. With a friendly smile, the elder asked if they had met before. Snaky felt his heart drop, mentally preparing for a quick escape. Doggo, however, stayed composed. He turned around and replied smoothly, praising the elder's memory and claiming they had crossed paths at an auction once. The elder furrowed his brow in thought, and Snaky couldn't help but think Doggo's excuse was paper thin. But after a moment, the elder nodded and said he remembered the two meetings 6 years ago. Doggo chuckled, once again complimenting the elder's sharp memory. Snaky couldn't believe it actually worked. Before the conversation could go further, a servant approached and informed the elder that the young prince was waiting for him upstairs. The elder excused himself politely, and Doggo returned the gesture, wishing him a good journey. Soon, Snaky whispered to Doggo, asking if they had really met before. Doggo smirked and explained that people from big sects often attended auctions, but it was impossible for someone like the elder to remember everyone. Yet no one wanted to admit to having a poor memory, especially prideful old men. Snaky sighed in relief and slithered toward a corner to hide, but Doggo mocked him for being such a coward, suggesting they could always fight if things went south. Snaky shot him a glare, pointing out that Doggo had been sweating buckets just moments ago. Wait a second. Dogs don't sweat, though, so what exactly did Snaky feel? Anyway, he then wondered aloud why Elder Joe would be traveling with the Qin Kingdom's royal family. Doggo, with a philosophical air, quoted, "The world bustles for profit, and the world hustles for gain." Snaky stared at him blankly, completely lost. Doggo smacked his own forehead. Why would he even say this to a snake in the first place? By nightfall, the pair arrived at a border town in the Qin Kingdom. Deciding to rest for the night, they made their way to a lively tavern where the air was filled with raucous laughter and the clinking of cups. The server welcomed them warmly and quickly led them to a private room on the second floor. Soon, a feast of exquisite dishes was spread before them, the aroma enough to make their mouths water. The table was piled high with exotic dishes, all made from demon beast meat. Although Doggo was just as tempted as Snaky, he kept his composure. He tells the man that he will be calling him over if he ever needed anything else. Once the waiter left, the pair dropped their disguises, shoved the vegetables aside, and dug into the meat with gusto. Snaky devoured a demon fish with delight, while Doggo grabbed a drink and Snaky wanted to try to. But as soon as he took a sip, he spat it out in disgust. "What kind of garbage is this? Even a dog wouldn't drink it," he grumbled. Snaky took a sip as well, only to make a face. "It tastes weird. Could it be drugged?" he asked. Doggo chuckled and praised Snaky, confirming that there was indeed a drug in the drink, and in the food as well. Snaky froze mid-bite, then frantically started spitting out everything he'd eaten. Doggo casually tossed him an antidote pill, assuring him that it was nothing more than a cheap knockout drug, common in lawless places like this. "But," Doggo added with a sly grin, "if they want to play dirty, they can't blame me for playing nastier." He called for the waiter again and ordered another feast. The waiter hesitated and went to consult the boss, asking if they should keep serving them, reasoned that they'd already eaten so much. The boss clenched his teeth and decided to up the ante. He instructed the staff to lace the next round with their strongest knockout drug. If the two were still standing after all that, it was clear they were powerful cultivators, and their valuables would be worth the effort. Soon, another table of demon beast delicacies was brought up. Doggo and Snaky didn't bother eating this time. They simply stored everything in their storage bags and prepared to leave. Snaky hesitated at the open window. "Are we just leaving like this?" he asked. Doggo gave him a look asking if he was planning to pay. He explained that the place was shady AF, and there were human bones piled up in the kitchen. Snaky, however, had a different question in mind. "Shouldn't we kill them all, loot the place, and burn it down?" Doggo froze for a moment, then muttered that sometimes Snaky was even less of a human than him. Snaky pouted, reminding Doggo that he wasn't human in the first place. When the boss and his cronies finally burst into the room, they found it empty save for the remnants of food and discarded bones. Furious, the boss slammed the table and ordered his men to notify the Heavenly Puppet Sect. "No one eats my meat for free. I don't care who they are, they're dead." Meanwhile, our lovely duo had found an abandoned house to rest in. Doggo tells him to keep cultivating while he goes out for a quick errand. Snaky agreed, but immediately suspected Doggo was up to no good. Using a concealment talisman, Snaky quietly followed him. Sure enough, Doggo headed to a weapons shop to sell 3 high-quality weapons. The shopkeeper listened as Doggo demanded 8 spirit stones and asked to inspect the goods. Snaky seethed as he watched from the shadows, realizing these items were from the storage bag they had taken from the clone. He grew angrier with each stop Doggo made, next to a pill shop where Doggo earned 15 spirit stones, and then to a materials shop. The further they went, the more Snaky fumed. So much for splitting 50-50. As Doggo walked out of the materials shop, he suddenly felt a murderous aura behind him, wondering what it was. At the same time, Snaky, hiding nearby, heard two men complaining about their situation. One of them cursed whoever had dragged them out so late at night, calling it a waste of time. The other, sounding just as annoyed, mentioned that they were disciples of the heavenly puppet sect, sent to investigate. He lamented their misfortune, being stuck in this remote place for 3 years because they couldn't break through to the Foundation establishment stage. However, he admitted that the job wasn't all bad. There were plenty of opportunities to make some extra cash here. Up ahead, two disciples spotted a familiar figure. One of them narrowed his eyes. Isn't that the little guy who the owner was looking after? The other recognized him too, and was ready to capture him, but his companion stopped him, telling him to use his head for once, pointing out he was heading into the treasure pavilion. He must have some valuable items on him. Overhearing their conversation, Snaky quickly realized that Doggo had caught their attention. Thankfully, neither of them were powerful. He's gonna keep an eye on these two, and maybe he could get something for himself as well. Snaky chuckled to himself, imagining there's always a bigger fish scenario, or perhaps he should say, there's always a bigger snake. Inside the treasure pavilion, Doggo was personally greeted by the shopkeeper. The moment the shopkeeper saw the storage bag Doggo carried, his expression shifted, and he immediately invited Doggo into a private room. Turning to an assistant, he barked orders to shut the front door. The assistant hesitated, mentioning there were still customers outside, but the shopkeeper waved him off. The doors were promptly shut, leaving the two disciples outside. The two disciples, standing in the rain, exchanged glances and confirmed the guy must have had a lot of stuff on him. But the treasure pavilion pays a lot in tribute every year, so they don't plan to mess with them and decide to wait outside. Some time passed, and the rain didn't let up. Just as they started losing patience, the doors opened. The shopkeeper stepped out, beaming. "Gentlemen, how can I help you?" he asked with a polite smile. Dropping all pretense, one of them grabbed the shopkeeper by the collar, telling him to cut the act, and demanded to know where the little dude was. Terrified, the shopkeeper stammered that the customer had already left, through the back door. The two disciples immediately let him go and rushed out the back, scanning the streets with their spiritual senses. Snaky, watching from a distance, observed Doggo ambling along at a leisurely pace. Despite his anger over Doggo's earlier antics, Snaky noticed that Doggo had picked up a few items he could actually use, which softened his mood slightly. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that Doggo had intentionally slowed down, as if he were baiting the two. Was this another one of Doggo's schemes? The disciples tracked Doggo to an abandoned place on the outskirts of town. One look at the rundown building, and it was obvious there was a trap. Pushing open the door cautiously, they saw nothing but a black dog sitting in the center of the room. One of the disciples stepped forward, bowing respectfully. He introduced himself as someone responsible for maintaining order in the area, and claimed he had no ill intentions, only wishing for a conversation. The other guy, less patient, scoffed at the overly polite approach. Drawing his sword, he pointed at the dog, which casually lifted its leg and urinated in front of him. Enraged, the disciple declared that anyone who refused to show themselves would meet the same fate as the dog. He swung his sword, slicing Doggo clean in two. As he counted down, expecting someone to reveal themselves, the severed half of Doggo's body suddenly lunged at him. But he knew what's up. Without hesitation, he summoned two lizard puppets and sent them toward Doggo. But against Doggo, these were nothing but junk. Snaky, observing everything from outside with his spiritual sense, noted the disciples' growing desperation. One of the lizard puppets suddenly spat out a fireball, igniting an explosion that collapsed the entire place. Dust and debris filled the air, and the two disciples retreated, thinking they had the upper hand. However, as the smoke cleared, Doggo's body began reforming, piece by piece, before their horrified eyes. The lizard puppets, barely touched bits of Doggo's flesh, started malfunctioning. Soon, the disciples panicked as Doggo's figure loomed before them. The disciples cursed Doggo, calling him a monster. Meanwhile, outside, Snaky observed the scene with growing amusement. Clearly, that one guy can't hurt Doggo, but he will step in and help if things get dicey. This way, Doggo will owe him a favor, so he's just gonna glue his eye on the other guy for now. One disciple was already exhausted, panting heavily as he shouted to his senior brother that the black dog's techniques were far too strange. Neither sword nor blade could do anything against him. The senior disciple, who had been standing quietly, finally made his move. Without a word, he summoned a massive frog puppet, and the two finally attacked together. As soon as Doggo laid eyes on that toad puppet, he couldn't help but laugh because this thing looked dumb as shit. But there was no time for jokes because, at that moment, the two had launched their attacks. The senior brother whipped out his fan, and a fierce wind, sharp as blades, slashed through the air. In an instant, Doggo was diced into tiny pieces. Meanwhile, the wind caught on Snakey's little storage bag and got him choking. On the other side, the toad puppet sprang into action. Without giving Doggo a chance to reform his body, it took a deep breath and, followed by a loud burp, it sucked everything into its tummy. Watching this unfold, one of them was sure Doggo was done for, but the senior brother warned against letting their guard down. Snakey, too, thought Doggo had been swallowed whole. Just then, something seemed off with that puppet. Before anyone could react, Doggo exploded out of the toad's body like a horror movie jump scare, completely wrecking the puppet in the process. The senior brother stood there and couldn't believe his unbeatable puppet, the one that had crushed every opponent under the Foundation establishment stage, had been destroyed just like that. Both of them realized things were going south fast. They turned to run, but it was too late. Doggo had already appeared behind them. One of them tried to play the big shot, warning Doggo that he was a disciple of the Heavenly Puppet sect. Did he really dare to kill him? The senior brother didn't waste time with threats. He figured, sure, maybe Doggo could counter puppets, but there was no way he could deal with artifacts too, and with that, the two of them charged again. Doggo just smirked, thinking, did these guys seriously think their strength was enough to take him down? What a joke. A second later, he unleashed an attack. Black mist swirled like a violent storm, hammering them from all directions. Their screams filled the air, and Doggo just chuckled darkly, suggesting they might as well turn into minced meat already. Snakey, watching from the side, was genuinely surprised. Who knew Doggo was this powerful? He realized he needed to train harder himself. Just as he was heading back, something caught his attention. He slithered toward the source and turned a corner, only to see someone on the ground, twitching like crazy. At first, he assumed it was just some random hobo having a bad day. But then, why was the guy flailing his arms like that? Was he an idiot? But the moment Snakey noticed the scar at the corner of the guy's eye, he recognized this was the same human from before. Meanwhile, back at Doggo's side, he had completely finished off the two opponents and decided to use a soul-searching technique. But nothing happened. At that moment, both he and Snakey realized that the guys they just fought were actually puppets. Snakey immediately slithered back, his mind racing. The Heavenly Puppet sect was rumored to have techniques that could create puppets identical to their real bodies. If that was true, then this guy in front of him was probably the real deal. But what if this was another fake? He quickly scanned the area with his spiritual sense, but nothing suspicious within 100 meters. Just this one guy. But he couldn't be careless. What if this guy had some kind of powerful artifact? Thus, he needed to finish this fast and clean. Without hesitation, Snakey dumped a pile of talismans from his bag. Meanwhile, the man's strings snapped, and he cursed under his breath. Damn it, losing the puppet, and even Yu Qiang was dead too. Who the hell was that black dog? Just as he was cursing his misfortune, he suddenly felt an intense heat behind him. He turned around, and in front of him was a massive fireball, covered in layers of talismans. He jumped to his feet, eyes wide in horror, saying, "What the hell is this now?" Snakey also panicked, saying, "Damn it." The guy had woken up at the worst possible time. His mouth was already burning, and the fireball had reached its maximum size, so he quickly spat it out. The man knew there was no dodging it, so he immediately activated his protective jade pendant and summoned several other defensive artifacts. He was about to smugly declare that water countered fire, but before he could finish his thought, his entire body felt like it had been struck by lightning. That's when he realized the fireball wasn't just fire. It was packed with thunder talismans too. Everything shattered instantly. And as the realization sank in, he noticed something even worse. Whoever it was had fused multiple elemental talismans together. Fire, thunder, maybe even more. Wasn't he afraid they'd explode on him instead? He tried to retreat, but his heart dropped when he saw the walls behind him, which were covered in even more talismans. What kind of lunatic does this? He cursed internally, but deep down he already knew this was going to be a very bad day. But by the time the man realized what was happening, it was already too late. Snakey triggered the explosion, setting off multiple layers of talismans at once. The man panicked and immediately activated his bell artifact. But before he could even breathe a sigh of relief, a golden scale shot out, breaking through the artifact. His face twisted in horror. But before he could even react, a deafening explosion followed. When the dust settled, he was still alive, but barely. His face was unrecognizable, and he couldn't believe that even after all that, he was still getting wrecked. Then, from the shadows, something slithered toward him. He saw the glint of scales and weakly asked what the heck was attacking him. Realizing the guy wasn't dead yet, Snakey didn't waste any time. He spat out a fireball. Of course, one wasn't enough. A second one, then a third, then countless fireballs rained down on the poor guy. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, residents were starting to freak out from the endless explosions. Some thought it was gangs fighting each other again, while others didn't care to find out and just started running for their lives. Doggo, who had just finished looting the enemy's storage bag, also heard the commotion. His first thought? Yep, that's definitely Snakey. But what was scaring the little guy so much? Not wasting any time, Doggo used his soul-searching technique on the corpse in front of him, surprised to find this one wasn't a puppet. With that all done, he hurried up and went to find Snakey. But Snakey wasn't exactly in trouble. He was actually busy looting, and from the look on his face, he had just hit the jackpot. Doggo, meanwhile, finished digging through the guy's memories. After all that effort, all he got was the first level of the puppet sect's technique. He scoffed. Seriously? The heavenly puppet sect is this stingy? They don't even teach their disciples the full technique? Doggo had been hoping to learn how to make human-shaped puppets. But the first level only covered basic mechanical beasts which were quite useless. Unless he could find the real body of the other guy, this was pretty much worthless for now. He dug a hole with his paw and covered the bodies, then headed toward the city, planning to track down the real guy. If he found the guy, then he'd just drag Snakey into the fight with him and get it over with. Soon, Doggo arrived at the scene. He took one look at the charred ruins and the burnt ground and immediately turned to Snakey, asking if he had finished the job. Snakey gulped and quickly denied everything. He insisted he had just been peacefully training the whole time. He had definitely not seen any disciples from the heavenly puppet sect, let alone fought them. Doggo narrowed his eyes and stepped closer. He pointed out that he never even mentioned the heavenly puppet sect, saying this dumb snake couldn't even lie properly. Snakey doubled down, pretending not to hear him. Instead, he told Doggo that if he had just killed 2 puppet sect disciples, shouldn't they be running away by now? Because Snakey himself was getting out of here. And just like that, he tried to slither off. Too bad Doggo was faster. He grabbed Snakey and reminded him that they needed to split the loot fair and square. Snakey fumed, saying Doggo still hadn't answered for secretly fencing stolen goods behind his back. But now he wanted to act all righteous? What a hypocrite. Not far away, 2 people who had heard the explosions were already fleeing for their lives. They had no idea what just happened, nor did they care. They just knew that sticking around was a bad idea. By the time the 2 finally stopped bickering, they were both out of breath, but had reached a deal. Doggo pulled out the loot from the storage bag, the pills and demon beast meat he had traded for at the treasure pavilion, and split the spirit stones in half. Snakey accepted the goods without hesitation, and immediately tried to run again, but Doggo caught him. "And what about the human stuff?" he asked. Grumbling, Snakey pulled out the remaining loot. Unfortunately, the storage bag had burned to ashes, so only 2 things survived, a suit of armor and a small bell. Doggo clicked his tongue, saying, "Now these are some real treasures." The bell was slightly broken, but Doggo said he could get it fixed later, saying he would let Snakey take it. But before Snakey could get excited, Doggo suddenly leaned in close to the armor and started licking it. Snakey's instincts immediately tell him Doggo is up to no good. Sure enough, in the next second, Doggo snatched up the armor and bolted. Snakey instantly realized he'd been played. With a flick of his tail, he swept it toward Doggo, but of course that crafty mutt dodged with ease. Now fully suited up, Doggo smugly announced that Snakey needed to reach a higher level to even wear this armor. Since Snakey wasn't there yet, he'd be taking it for himself. Snakey pouted, but the moment he saw how the armor adjusted itself perfectly to Doggo's body, his eyes lit up saying, "Damn, that thing looks cool!" Still, he wasn't giving up. But before he could argue, Doggo decided to sweeten the deal by offering all the puppets they had looted. Snakey glanced at the pile of trashy puppets from that foolish human cultivator and immediately suspected Doggo was trying to scam him again. Doggo told him to hold his horses, then pulled out a huge chunk of dark gold stone and declared that he was going to forge the ultimate puppet for Snakey. Not only that, he'd even enhance the existing ones. Snakey reluctantly agreed, though what he didn't say was he had hidden away a special jade stone from the loot, and he had a strong feeling that was the real treasure. At this point, their war spoils consisted of the bell artifact, the armor, the dark gold stone Doggo planned to use for puppet making, and the mysterious jade stone Snakey was keeping secret. Of course, Snakey was sure Doggo had also kept a few things for himself. He figured it was time to start learning from the Mutt's sneaky ways. With their loot sorted, it was time to find a good place to train. Doggo pointed at the mountain ahead and told Snakey to take a good look. Snakey thought it was just a regular mountain. Doggo corrected him, saying it was a spirit mountain, once a prosperous mining site for spiritual stone ores almost 500 years ago. Soon, they arrived at the mountain peak. As expected, the mines had been completely excavated centuries ago. However, the mountain still had the richest spiritual energy in the area, and best of all, no one ever came here, which was perfect for training. As they ventured deeper, they spotted some human skeletons scattered around. Doggo sniffed the air, then confidently declared that he had found the perfect spot. He pulled out a giant pot and told Snakey to fill it with water. Snakey obliged, but before he could ask what was next, Doggo dumped a bunch of mysterious powder into the water, saying it was for body refinement. The next second, Doggo grabbed Snakey and yeeted him straight into the pot. Instantly, Snakey's entire body turned red as an unbearable burning sensation spread through him, and he was unprepared for the pain. Doggo, watching from the side, casually informed him that the first body refinement was always the most painful, but also the most effective. He advised Snakey not to pass out if he could help it. Snakey, gritting his teeth, declared that his willpower was 100 times stronger than the average person's, and that there was no way he'd pass out. Moments later, Snakey's old skin dissolved into the water, along with a bunch of impurities that his body had expelled. Snakey was thrilled about shedding his skin, and he excitedly told Doggo about it. Doggo chuckled and told him that body refinement lasted 7 days, so he should get comfortable. Leaving behind some demon beast meat, Doggo headed off to explore the mine. 7 days quickly passed. By now, Snakey had grown another meter, reaching a total length of 4 meters. However, he gained a new ability that allowed him to freely adjust his size, shrinking down to 1 meter whenever he wanted. At the same time, his strength and speed had tripled, making him way stronger than before, even though his cultivation level hadn't technically increased. But the real prize had to be his golden scales, which had spread further, now covering his entire tail and creeping up his torso. Snakey flicked his tail and admired his new form, saying, "Not bad. Not bad at all." The body refinement was finally over, but Doggo was still nowhere to be seen. Perfect. Snakey figured this was a great time to check out that mysterious jade stone he had looted earlier. He sent his spiritual sense into the stone, but all he saw was darkness. At first, he thought something was wrong with his spiritual sense, so he quickly looked elsewhere to test it out. Nope, everything else looked fine. So, he tried again. This time, as he ventured deeper into the jade, he suddenly hit a wall. This caused him to wonder if this was some kind of massive storage space. Curious, he kept going. After slithering further, he bonked his head onto something hard, rubbing his head. Oh wait, he doesn't have arms. Anyway, he looked up, and what he saw left him completely speechless. Before him stood a mountain of spirit stones, at least 1,000 pieces, if not more. Our boy just hit the jackpot, but then he noticed a few perfectly shaped spirit stones in the pile, radiating an energy far richer than the rest. The next second, those stones moved on their own. Before Snakey could react, they shot straight into his mouth. His stomach stretched painfully, and for a moment he thought he was about to be torn apart. Just when he thought he was done for, the cauldron suddenly stirred. A golden dragon emerged and instantly devoured the spirit stones. Snaky gasped for air as his stomach finally settled. He had no idea what just happened. However, the cauldron had only eaten those specific stones, ignoring the rest. Looks like the cauldron was a picky eater after all. Before he could make sense of it, a loud cry for help echoed from outside. Snaky quickly scanned the area with his spiritual sense and saw Doggo sprinting toward him as if his life depended on it. And behind him, a swarm of something crawling all over him. Did he just piss off an entire nest of something? Doggo, eyes watering from pain, shouted that these things countered his abilities and that his spiritual energy was running out fast. The armor was useless too because the creatures had squeezed through the tiny gaps and were biting him from the inside. Even his ass cheeks weren't spared. Snaky let out a sigh, but he couldn't just leave the mutt to die, no matter how annoying he was. Snaky then said if he ever got killed, it'd definitely be Doggo's fault. Snaky burrowed underground using his earth escape technique. A second later, he popped up above Doggo and rained down a fireball attack. Doggo, with the last of his energy, shielded himself. After a loud explosion, the entire mine lit up in a sea of flames, completely wiping out the swarm of ants. Or so they thought. More of them immediately crawled up from underground. Realizing this was bad news, Snaky grabbed Doggo with his tail and bolted. Even with his earth escape, they just couldn't shake off the swarm. The moment they resurfaced, they found themselves at the edge of the Geese Fall River. Snaky turned to Doggo, asking, "What now?" "Do they swim across, but that's basically digging their own grave." Doggo shook off the dirt, and instead of answering, pulled out a fan. Snaky instantly recognized it. It was that human cultivator's weapon. Just as he expected, Doggo had been holding out on him, so he muttered under his breath saying this old dog really couldn't be trusted, but he hopped onto the fan anyway. Glancing back, he noticed the swarm shrinking away under the sunlight. Looks like they were afraid of the sun. Curious, he turned to Doggo. "So, how did you even end up in this mess?" Doggo explained that these were spirit-devouring ants, creatures that specialized in eating spirit stones and usually nested beneath mines. The moment they sensed spiritual energy, they'd swarm in a frenzy. Doggo believed it was his naturally abundant spiritual energy that had drawn them out. But Snaky knew better. Pretending to be casual, he asked, "How far can they sense spiritual energy?" Doggo thought for a moment before answering for normal spirit stones. "It's about 100 meters. For high-grade stones, it's about 1 kilometer. But if it's supreme-grade spirit stones, they'll probably go berserk." Then asked Snaky why was he asking. Snaky said he was just curious, but gulped nervously and knew he was the actual culprit. Before he could dwell on it, the sky darkened and the sound of thunder rumbled in the distance. Snaky nervously glanced at the fan. Are we sure this thing is safe?" Doggo scoffed, saying, "Of course," pointing out this is a top-tier artifact and how there's absolutely no way something will go. "Well, this is why you don't jinx stuff." He didn't even get to finish when a massive lightning bolt struck them directly. Snaky, still trembling from the lightning strike, turned to Doggo and asked, "What did you wanted to say again?" But before Doggo could answer, they both noticed the fan had shattered. And just like that, with 2 simultaneous screams, they plunged straight into the river. Unfortunately, their bad luck didn't end there. They got sucked into the most terrifying whirlpool in the area. The current was so strong that they couldn't control their bodies at all. Thinking fast, Snaky shrunk his body to reduce resistance, and then tried using water bullet technique in the opposite direction to counter the pull. It didn't get him out, but at least he could stay steady. He quickly poked his head above water to share this genius plan with Doggo, except Doggo was nowhere to be seen. Using his spiritual sense, he spotted Doggo already spinning wildly inside the vortex, already passed out. Snaky cursed, saying this old dog is useless. If he gets sucked in, he's done for, and I'm definitely not going after him. Then, the next second, he dove straight in and wrapped his tail around Doggo. "Damn it! Now I'm getting pulled in too!" No time to think. He quickly noticed several large rocks below. That must be what was causing the whirlpool. Clenching Doggo in his jaws, Snaky used his tail to shatter the rocks one by one. Just as he suspected, the whirlpool immediately disappeared. With all the strength he had left, Snaky dragged Doggo to shore. One look at Doggo's limp form and Snaky realized, yep, the mutt had drowned. Should he help him the human way, like the mouth-to-mouth stuff? But the thought made him gag. Then, a saying popped into his head. Beating a drowning dog. That sounded like a good idea. So Snaky whipped his tail against Doggo's stomach. And maybe accidentally smacked his face a few times, too. A few minutes later, Doggo gushed out a mouthful of water and gasped for air. Snakey proudly announced that he was now Doggo's lifesaver. But Doggo, on the other hand, looked like he didn't even know who he was. Snakey figured this was a perfect chance to trick him into revealing the truth about that supreme-grade spirit stone. So, acting casual, he mentioned he had a friend who once found a perfectly square-shaped spirit stone. This made Doggo's ears perked up instantly. He shoved his face right against Snakey's and shouted, saying, "Did Snakey say he had a supreme-grade spirit stone cut directly from a spirit vein?" Then pressed on, demanding to know where it came from. Snakey insisted that he was asking for a friend. Doggo obviously didn't believe him, but at the thought of Snakey risking his life saving him, he sighed and said that even a core formation cultivator might struggle to get their hands on something like that. Maybe they needed to head back to that half-abandoned spirit mine and take another look. He then asked if that so-called friend wanted to come along, but Snakey didn't want to get anywhere near those ants again. "Actually," he muttered, "I think I'll just take a nap." 2 months later, the wildfire in Iron Bear Mountain had finally died down, thanks to the heavy rainy season. But now a large number of Snake Hunter sect disciples had arrived. Elsewhere, a man scolded his junior brother for losing track of their target again. That white snake had devoured the 5 of their mountain-moving sect disciples, and today he swore to skin it alive. The 2 of them were at Chi Refinement Stage 6 and 8, respectively, and they were not about to let themselves become laughingstocks. Even worse, their sect had placed a bounty on the snake, meaning every hunter in the area was now after it. Determined to finish the job themselves, they scoured the forest, knowing the white snake had disappeared here. They pointed out the white snake was hit by them, believing she couldn't have gone far. Deep in the swamp, a small white snake slithered slowly, blood trickling from her mouth. Oh man, what did these bastards do to our poor little white snake? She had never understood what hatred truly was before, but now, with her entire home destroyed, she had no choice but to seek revenge. For now, though, she just needed to survive. The 2 pursuers arrived at the swamp. The junior brother hesitated, saying this feels like an ambush. But the senior brother told him to stop whining and get down there. The junior brother was still uneasy, but he figured his senior brother was stronger, so he could go first. One of them reached into the murky water, sending out his spiritual sense, and immediately got a reaction. The white snake was definitely hiding in there. They just needed a little time to locate her. But before they could finish, a fireball suddenly hurtled toward them. They turned around and saw a massive wolf. One of them gritted his teeth, saying, "It's this damn wolf again. Every time I get close to the snake, it shows up, spits fire, and runs away." This time, though, he wasn't letting it escape. Raising his weapon, he charged at Wolfie. Wolfie howled, basically telling the little white snake to run, saying he would draw them away. She nodded and slipped away in the opposite direction. The 2 split up. One went after Wolfie, while the other chased after the injured white snake. Meanwhile, on the other side, 2 massive boulders collided midair. After 2 months of training, Snakey's gravity technique was now so strong that he could crush low-level cultivators from 50 meters away. His fireball technique had evolved into Fire Serpent, packing way more punch. His Earth Escape technique now lets him travel 3,000 miles a day. And of course, he had also mastered wind blades and lightning strikes. On top of that, Doggo had finished upgrading his puppets, and after days of practice, Snakey could now control them with ease. The best part is that he could share their vision. It felt like he could see everything on this mountain at once. For the first time, he truly felt like the king of this mountain, until Doggo came running over to ruin the moment. Doggo panted, saying his 2 friends were in big trouble. Snakey immediately thought of Little White Snake and Wolfie. Doggo nodded. Before they parted ways, he had secretly placed a golden light charm on them. It was an emergency protection spell that would activate when their lives were in danger. It could keep them alive for 1 hour, but once triggered, it meant things had already gone south, and now, somehow, it was activated. Doggo turned to Snakey to ask for his plan, but before he could even finish his sentence, Snakey was already gone. Little White Snake had been cornered inside a cave. No matter how hard the humans tried, they couldn't break through the golden light protecting her. One of them even believed she was the legendary old snake demon that people all talked about. His senior brother shook his head, saying no, that one was a black snake. Meanwhile, he had already caught Wolfie, smirking as he told him that the golden light wouldn't last forever. Once it disappeared, they'd both be dead. Wolfie let out a low growl, unwilling to accept defeat. Inside the cave, the two human cultivators regrouped. The junior brother laughed, saying they would get rewarded heavily once they head back. The senior brother, however, felt uneasy, so he wondered if their elder had also came along. The junior brother said he should be at the campsite nearby. Hearing that, the senior brother calmed down and sent out a communication jade to call for backup. The other guy wasn't happy about it. Believing their elder came, their credit would be cut in half. The senior brother reassured him, saying they weren't calling for backup to share the credit. Instead, they were being careful. If these two beasts had a powerful backer, they needed insurance. If no one came to save them, they'd kill them after the golden light vanished, and the credit would still be theirs. After blocking the cave entrance, they moved back to monitor the surroundings while waiting for their elder. Doggo was panting heavily from running. He couldn't believe it. He had lost to Snaky in speed. He even wondered if Snaky had some sort of special Earth spirit physique. Meanwhile, Snaky had already reached the cave. The moment he got there, he could sense both his friends inside. Carefully scanning the area, he saw no humans around. Strange. If they couldn't break the golden light, that meant they weren't Foundation Establishment cultivators, which also meant they were definitely hiding somewhere nearby. He decided not to reveal his spiritual sense. That would tip them off. Instead, he used his puppets, which was a much safer choice. The two human cultivators scanned their surroundings but saw nothing suspicious, so they planned to kill the two and get back. Just as they were about to make a move, they spotted a lizard on a nearby rock. One of them rolled his eyes, saying, "It's just a lizard," asking why is he getting paranoid over that. He pointed out that the lizard was so scared that it was twitching just from looking at them. They both laughed, but then something felt off. Where was the clicking sound? Before they could process it, the lizard opened its mouth, and fire erupted from it. But there wasn't just one. There was a whole horde. They panicked, trying to cast defensive spells, but one of them was too slow. The explosion sent shockwaves across the area. When the dust settled, the junior brother's head had been blown in half. The senior brother barely survived, crawling out of the rubble with rage and confusion. He believed this had to be the heavenly puppet sect's work, but why the hell was a Chin Kingdom cultivator messing around here? Inside the cave, Little Whitesnake suddenly sensed something. She turned to Wolfie with excitement, saying, "It's him! He's back!" Wolfie's ears perked up as he lifted his head in surprise. Meanwhile, outside, the guy was breaking out in a cold sweat. He suddenly cupped his hands and loudly declared his identity, addressing what he assumed was a heavenly puppet sect cultivator lurking nearby. He insisted that there must have been a misunderstanding between them. Snaky scoffed. Misunderstanding? Yeah, right. Without wasting a second, he commanded his puppets to keep attacking. But this time, the man had already regained his composure. With a sneer, he declared that he was at Chi Refinement Stage 8, meaning these puppets couldn't harm him. While dodging attacks, he sent out his spiritual sense to locate his enemy. It didn't take long. He quickly realized that all the puppets shared a connection to one specific point. A smirk crossed his face. "So, you're hiding underground?" For someone from the mountain-moving sect, who specialized in earth element techniques, this was as good as Snaky standing in the open waving a flag. The next second, the man used earth escape technique and dove underground. Snaky wasn't surprised that the lizard puppet could only take down mid-stage Chi refinement cultivators. But something else caught his attention. This guy's clothes didn't match the Snake Hunter sect's uniforms. Instead of worrying, the man still believed he was dealing with a Chin Kingdom cultivator and launched his attack. Snaky responded with wind blades. The man scoffed, saying using wind blades underground was stupid, saying it was like hitting a rock with an egg. But he couldn't have been more wrong. The moment his weapon and attacks were completely neutralized, his eyes widened in horror. He didn't even have time to process how this was possible before suddenly the wind blade ripped through his arm. The pain shot through him, but he clung to one hope, believing the elder was nearby. If he could just buy time, he could survive. He even considered dropping to his knees to beg for mercy. But before he could say a word, a massive black snake loomed over him. A lightning bolt shot straight from Snaky's mouth. Before the man could even scream, Snaky's tail slammed down with full force. "Mess with my people? You deserve to die." With a thunderous explosion, Snaky burst out of the ground, spitting out dirt in the process. He frowned, believing lightning strike was too loud. If more enemies were around, they'd be on him soon. Glancing at the corpse, he recalled the guy had mentioned his elder. Wait, was that his backup? If so, he needed to grab his friends and get out. But before he could move, a massive blade slammed onto the ground. Standing atop the blade, a man stared down at him with interest. "Black Snake?" he murmured. "So, the rumors were true." Snaky froze. This guy's presence alone was completely different from the others. The man was a Foundation establishment elder of the mountain-moving sect, also known as Elder Ye. The man had heard the rumors about a black snake and a black dog lurking in these mountains. A snake that could speak, a dog that slaughtered cultivators, a pair that had killed snake hunter sect disciples and stolen a spirit tail chicken from the Zhao Yao sect. It seemed the legends were true. Without hesitation, the man drew his blade and swung it down toward Snaky. Snaky didn't panic. After all, his puppets were all around him. A nearby lizard puppet immediately spat out a fireball at the man, but he barely flinched. With a casual swipe of his blade, he effortlessly blocked the attack. Then with an aerial spin, he suddenly sliced down toward Snaky's tail. Snaky's instincts screamed at him and knew this guy was dangerous. Without thinking, he shrank his body instantly, dodging just in time. The elder raised an eyebrow, saying that was unexpected, but he wasn't done. Raising his hand, he cast a spell. The surrounding dust and dirt suddenly lifted into the air. A violent storm erupted, so strong that even the trees were ripped from the ground. Even the puppets were instantly swept up and shredded to pieces. Snaky was shocked, because everything within a few hundred meters had been wiped out in an instant. So this was the true power of a Foundation establishment cultivator. Before he could even recover, the man's blade was already swinging down at him with terrifying force. How the hell am I supposed to beat this guy? With no better option, he dodged as his life depended on it, because, well, it kinda did. He tried blocking with his golden scales, but got sent flying instead. The man wasn't giving him even a second to breathe. If brute force wasn't working, he'd have to rely on his brain instead. And then, an idea hit him. But before he could act on it, the man was already gathering power for another devastating strike. A powerful slash swept through the air, but surprisingly it missed. Snaky had just started burrowing into the ground when the man threw his weapon straight at him. No time to escape. If he couldn't dodge, then he'd have to take it head on. Snaky quickly shifted back to his original size and used his tail to block the attack. Shockingly, the impact sent the weapon flying instead. The man couldn't believe his eyes. But Snaky wasn't in great shape either. This guy was the real deal, a true Foundation establishment expert, leagues above that half-baked Chen guy. The gap between them was massive. If Snaky wanted to win, there was only one way. The man examined his weapon and noticed his blade was chipped. He immediately suspected that Snaky had a lot of secrets. Meanwhile, Snaky used his earth escape technique, disappearing underground. The man considered turning the soil into solid rock. But Snaky didn't fall for it because he had seen Doggo falling for that trick before. Snaky moved swiftly beneath the surface, and even rock wasn't going to stop him. The man crouched down, muttering that this wasn't possible. A demonic beast like this was far too unusual. No wonder his disciple had died to it. But then he found Snaky's position. He drove his sword into the ground and followed up with a spell, and massive spikes shot out. Snaky sensed danger and ducked just in time, but not before a deep cut ran across his head. Suddenly, thick spikes erupted from the ground. The man stared at the tip, expecting to see a corpse, but there was nothing. He wasn't holding back anymore. He kept spamming the same deadly spell, hoping to skewer Snaky for good, but Snaky dodged every time. The problem was, the man clearly didn't want him to stay underground. This wasn't working, so Snaky had to change tactics. In a flash, he activated a wind speed talisman and shot back to the surface. The man was ready, aiming to unleash another attack. But Snaky was gone again. The man figured it must be some invisibility trick and tried an even more powerful attack, but still, no Snaky. Turns out, Snaky had tricked him. He had actually burrowed 800 meters deep underground. Fighting someone much stronger was beyond difficult. If he wanted to save his friends, he'd need to wait for Doggo to back him up. Then, a voice rang out, claiming they had found Snaky. He froze, thinking he had been discovered. But Snaky knew 800 meters underground wasn't exactly an easy place to locate someone. If the man really knew where he was, they would have attacked immediately instead of shouting about it. Yeah, it was just a bluff. And he was right. The man had been scanning the area with his spiritual sense, hoping to lure him out, but now he wasn't sure if Snaky had truly escaped or was just hiding deeper. Instead of wasting more time, he turned his focus toward the cave entrance. Slowly, he dragged his sword along the ground, step by step, heading for Snaky's friends. This made Snaky nervous. The man said he was about to count to 10. If Snaky didn't show up, his friends were dead. He smugly pointed out that in such a small space, his spell would pierce them too in just a few seconds. Wolfie howled, basically calling the man a bastard. Little White Snake was already in tears, silently praying for Snaky to not fall for it and stay away. The man, the absolute menace, even skipped numbers, jumping from 2 to 4, then to 6. Snaky had no choice but to expose his location, telling the man to come down and fight him instead of harming his friends. The man smirked and used Earth Escape, tunneling rapidly downward. After a while, he was surprised because Snaky was actually at 800 meters. He asked if Snaky wasn't afraid of being crushed down there. Even he had to be careful at depths beyond 500 meters. Activating a spell, he created a protective shield against the pressure. And then, he found Snaky. Without hesitation, he cast a spell, forcing the surrounding rocks to squeeze in on Snaky. Pain shot through him as he struggled free, then lunged at the man, deciding to go all in. The man, however, just chuckled coldly. A second later, his weapon pierced straight through Snaky's head, lifting him into the air. The man sighed, thinking it was a pity, but then again, even dead, Snaky's body was full of treasures. Did our boy really die? Of course not. The man was about to retrieve his prized corpse when something clattered to the ground. It was then he saw a small mechanical piece had fallen from Snaky's body, and he recognized it to be dark gold stone. This could only mean the thing he was holding was nothing but a puppet. The old man was stunned by how real the puppet looked, but before he could react further, several golden scales were flying toward him. He immediately realized it was a trap. With no time to dodge, he fired off 4 defensive spells in quick succession: a stone shield, 2 layers of earth armor, and finally, a earth wall. Though the last spell wasn't fully formed, he still figured it'd be more than enough. However, he can't be more wrong. The golden scales tore through everything like paper. His body, soft as butter, offered no resistance. As the old man let out a scream, Snaky let out a cold chuckle and lashed out with its tail. The blow landed before the old man could even raise his weapon, slicing off both legs in an instant. Grunting in pain, the old man tried to escape, but Snaky wasn't about to let him go. It fired off 3 elemental attacks: fire, wind, and lightning, but missed the mark. Snaky was panting heavily, clearly at his limit, and muttered that he was just 1 step away from finishing things. Meanwhile, the old man had crash-landed back on the ground. Gasping for breath, he popped a life-saving blood spirit pill and admitted he was lucky to have gotten away. But he didn't dare stay, adding that this snake was no ordinary creature. He figured he had to report back to the sect immediately. If this thing wasn't dealt with, it would become a major threat. But just as he was about to move, a black dog suddenly appeared in front of him. The old man instantly recognized it as the infamous demonic dog from the rumors. Breaking out in a cold sweat, he wondered if this had all been a setup from the beginning. Either way, escape was the only option now. But in his panic, he tripped and slammed right into a tree. Blood spurted from his mouth as he hit the ground with a heavy thud, and then he stopped moving. Doggo just stood there, completely baffled. He said he hadn't even touched him. Watching a Foundation establishment cultivator die like that felt oddly comical. Smacking its lips, Doggo muttered that Snaky Kid had done pretty well. Right then, Snaky burst up from underground. Without a word, it sank its fangs into the old man's head and launched a fireball point blank. Doggo flinched, about to intervene, until it heard the old man suddenly scream. That's when he realized the guy had been faking his death. Snaky followed up with several flame serpents, burning the old man until not even ashes were left. Gasping hard, Snaky looked like it could collapse any second. Only now did Doggo notice the countless wounds covering its body and asked if that was all from the cultivators. Snaky admitted part of it was, but the rest he did to himself. In order to pull off the puppet disguise, he'd literally ripped off his own skin and torn open his insides. Without that, he figured, he wouldn't have stood a chance. Doggo froze at first, staring at Snakey until he completely passed out. Then, with a sharp glint in his eyes and his jaw clenched, he turned his gaze toward the distance, remarking coldly that those scum from the mountain-moving sect had gone too far. How dare they hurt his disciple? Scooping Snakey into his arms, Doggo vowed silently to give them a proper lesson. Back in the cave, Doggo treated Snakey's wounds with herbs and activated a concealment barrier around the area, deciding it was safe enough for now. He told the others to focus on healing, mentioning that he had to step out for a bit. Little White Snake, still hugging Snakey tightly, worriedly pointed out that he hadn't woken up yet. Doggo reassured her with confidence, saying he'd be back before this incense stick finished burning. In the next scene, Doggo pulls out an absurdly thick, towering incense stick. Wolfie couldn't help but grumble, then asked if it had to be this huge. Doggo, unfazed, explained it was a healing incense, remarking that with wounds this severe, it had to be long and thick. He then asked if they both remembered the healing techniques. Little White Snake nodded and said she did. Doggo is satisfied and tells them to get started. As time passed, Doggo observed their wounds were steadily improving. He quietly placed down the storage pouches taken from the fallen cultivators and murmured to the unconscious Snakey that these were all his, completely untouched. Taking a deep breath, Doggo declared that it was time to settle the score. As the scene shifts to the mountain-moving sect's main hall, the sect master stared at the extinguished soul lamp of his junior brother and remarked that in the past 10 years, not one Foundation establishment elder had ever perished in the wild. The Grand Elder noted they weren't far from Serpent Valley and guessed this might be the work of one of the snake-hunting sect's other branches. After all, even though they belonged to the same parent sect, internal conflicts weren't uncommon. At this, Chen cut in and reminded them that all 5 factions of the snake-hunting sect had signed a peace pact before entering the mountain. Even if tempers flared, it should have been limited to junior disciples, and further explains that no one would dare kill a Foundation establishment elder. The sect master agreed, adding that this incident was especially embarrassing considering Chen had traveled far to be here and had to witness all this. Chen brushed it off, saying they were all on the same side anyway. Still, the sect master wondered aloud if it might not have been a cultivator and was actually a demon beast. However, the Grand Elder dismissed the idea, stating that a while back, even Elder Xuanyang's clone was attacked nearby, and after a thorough search within a 300-mile radius of Myriad Snakes Valley, no high-level beasts were found. He reasons that if there were a powerful demon beast around, he asserted, there's no way their junior brother wouldn't have noticed, let alone failed to escape. But when word came that the corpse had been burned and not devoured, Chen suddenly snapped to attention. He declared he knew exactly who the culprit was, saying it had to be that black snake demon. He tells them the creature might not have reached Foundation establishment, but it was smart, dangerously crafty, and surprisingly strong. Chen admitted several of his disciples had already fallen to it, and he himself had nearly died. Though he stopped short of giving details, he concluded with certainty that the black snake was behind it. Sensing the bitter hatred in his tone, the Grand Elder quietly concluded that Chen must have taken a forbidden pill recently, very likely due to a prior run-in with that snake. The sect master, vaguely familiar with the rumors about Snakey, decided that if Chen was so sure, then they'd let him assist in the pursuit. Chen let out a cold laugh, thinking to himself, if that's the case, then Snakey was surely finished. The order was quickly passed through the entire sect, informing all disciples to scour the mountains. Anyone who found a clue would be rewarded with 50 spirit stones. And with that, the sect master declared that by nightfall, they would slay the black snake. Not far away, Doggo picked up on the activity and muttered that he was right, and clearly these brutes weren't going to let this slide. With a sharp scoff, he activated his blood energy shield and growled that anyone who dared hurt Snakey was asking for trouble. Turning toward the grave of the mountain-moving sect's founder, Doggo snorted and remarked that if they wanted to play dirty, he'd just have to dig up their ancestor. Doggo followed the grave path straight to the ancestral tomb, clicking his tongue as he eyed the lavish setup. Judging by the ornate details, he guessed the mountain-moving sect had spent a fortune on this place. He muttered that they were certainly devoted, building a tomb this extravagant and keeping their ancestor's body so well preserved even after all these years. In the next scene, we see a body resting in a premium-grade ice coffin, almost looking alive. Doggo grinned, figuring he might as well take the coffin too. But the moment he tried to collect it, he realized the coffin just wouldn't budge. At that moment, the tomb suddenly began to tremble. A wave of icy breath spewed from the dragon sculpture above, and Doggo instantly recognized that he'd triggered a trap. The cold mist swirled rapidly, coalescing into a 3-tiered ice dragon clearly part of a defensive array. But Doggo didn't flinch. He snorted that he'd like to see if there was anything in this world he couldn't steal. No sooner had he spoken than the ice dragon froze him solid on the spot. That was enough to tick him off. With a sharp curse, Doggo's paw transformed into wickedly sharp claws. His body shifted, morphing into a dark dragon form. With a disdainful huff, he remarked that a glorified tomb trap dared to pretend it was a real dragon, asking how laughable it was. The next moment, he clamped down on the ice dragon's head and crushed it in one brutal squeeze. Meanwhile, back at the sect, a pair of disciples on grave duty noticed something was wrong, noting how the ancestral tomb was rumbling. The problem was that most of the sect's top cultivators had just left. But they knew the ancestral tomb wasn't something they could afford to mess up, so they rushed over. When they saw a massive hole torn open in the burial grounds, one of them broke down crying on the spot, asking his senior what they were supposed to do. Pushing through the tomb entrance, they found the worst possible outcome. The entire place had been ransacked. The coffin was gone, the treasures were gone, and everything was just gone. They almost shit their pants as they quickly ran back to inform the sect's higher-ups. Meanwhile, over on another mountain ridge, the Grand Elder asked Chen if his spirit compass was actually working, saying they'd already been searching for 2 hours. Chen replied that it didn't make sense unless the black snake had fled over 1,000 miles. But then he shook his head, saying that even if he tried, it'd take 6 hours to cover that distance. He noted the burnt smell in the air and suggested the culprit may have used a technique to mask their trail. Just as he finished, they spotted a strange flicker of light from a nearby peak and decided to check it out. Back in the cave, wild energy exploded outward as Snaky roared mid-cultivation. Chanting a mantra about using heaven as the board and life as the pieces, he suddenly broke through to the 7th level. Little White Snake and Wolfie came running over full of praise. The flattery made Snaky visibly shy. But at the same time, he noticed the golden scales had now covered nearly half his body, and he wondered aloud if continuing to break through would cover him in gold entirely. Imitating Snaky, Little White Snake tilted her head and started checking out her own tail, too. Suddenly, people outside started yelling how the mountain-moving sect had arrived, telling them to come out. Wolfie opened his mouth to say something, but Snaky stopped him, whispering for him to keep quiet. The three ducked behind the stone wall, and Snaky listened carefully and judged that the intruders were still far off, because his spiritual sense hadn't picked up anyone nearby. He figured they were trying to lure him out with noise, but he had faith in Doggo's barrier. Still, being so close to Snaky made her blush a little. Back outside, the cultivators arrived and quickly noticed the cave had gone quiet. The sect master snapped at the others to search every inch. Just then, a bird swooped down from the sky, and he knew it was a sect emergency signal. Reading the message, the leader's face twisted in rage, knowing the ancestral tomb had been robbed. He roared in fury and without hesitation ordered everyone to return to the sect. Doggo, perched in a nearby tree, watched them retreat with a grin. Chuckling to himself, he says, "Everything is going according to plan." He mused whether to go all the way and chuck the ancestor's body into the snake-hunting sect's cesspit. He also considered turning it into a puppet, which would have been hilarious, but admitted he hadn't yet gotten his hands on the 3rd-level technique from the puppet sect. Doggo let out a long sigh, muttering that if he had known he would end up like this, he should have asked for a copy back then. With his reputation at the time, who would have dared say no? He adds that not just the puppet sect, even their headquarters, the divine puppet sect, would have handed it over without a word. As we return to the mountain-moving sect again, the sect master and elders had all dropped to their knees, crying out that they'd failed their ancestor. He roared in fury, demanding to know who had the nerve to steal even the coffin. One disciple reminded everyone that their old ancestor had reached core formation, maybe even half a step into nascent soul. To pull this off, the thief had to be at least core formation level 2. But someone else raised a concern, asking if the culprit really was that strong. Why bother with grave robbing? Still, if they weren't, how did they get past a 3rd-tier defensive formation? Listening to all the back and forth, Chen stayed silent for a moment, then asked why it was only their sect that got hit. Why not any others? And just happened to be when everyone had left? The Grand Elder whipped around, glaring and snapping at him, and asks if he was implying something. Chen tells him to calm down, and clarifies that he was just analyzing the situation. He reasoned it all felt too coincidental. They'd barely stepped out before the tomb was hit. That, he suspected, either pointed to a personal grudge or someone trying to avenge the black snake. Then he brought up Doggo, asking if they knew Snake Demon had a black dog companion, the same one that used to dig up corpses in villages at the foot of the mountain. The sect master realized what Chen was implying, so without hesitation, he issued a sect-wide bounty. Both the Snake Demon and the black dog were to be hunted down, with 100 spirit stones offered for useful clues. Double that for their heads. One way or another, he declared, they were getting their ancestor back. Back in the cave, Doggo looked around and asked if everyone was just about healed. Seeing nods all around, he told them to pack up, saying they were heading out. That's when the trio finally emerged from hiding. Doggo explained that he'd found a new spot perfect for cultivation, but glancing at the way the three were huddled together, he asked what was going on. Snaky quickly replied that mountain-moving sect people were outside. Doggo waved it off, assuring them he'd already drawn them away. That surprised Snaky, asking how he'd pulled it off. Doggo grinned and told him he'd explain on the way, adding that he wasn't convinced they were done chasing yet. Just as he reached into his storage ring to show off some loot, he noticed the three were already gone. Snaky had pulled Little White Snake onto Wolfie's back, and the three had taken off in a panic. Snaky shouted that the enemy must be returning, and Doggo, trailing behind, yelled after them, asking if they even knew where they were going. Snaky just yelled back for him to hurry up. Doggo grumbled under his breath, calling him a dumb snake. The group eventually arrived at a new mountain, Fengshi Ridge. Inside the new cave, Snaky looked around wide-eyed, praising Doggo for finding such a great place. He remarked that it felt a lot like Snake Valley, and he liked it enough to claim it as their new base, so he decided to replant their fruit tree. The next day, Doggo pulled out a puppet looking exactly like Snaky, telling our boy it was fully repaired and ready to be stored. Snaky thanked him, but noted that something felt off about it. He suddenly remembered they still had those 3 storage pouches from earlier. Immediately, Doggo offered to give him some extra space, but Snaky refused, telling him one of the bags belonged to him. He explained that if it hadn't been for the giant snake puppet Doggo had made, he wouldn't have won. Doggo turned his head dramatically, covering his eyes and pretending to be overcome with guilt. He claimed he hadn't done enough and acted like he was full of regret. But all the while, he was already using a gravity spell to pull one of the bags toward himself. Snaky snorted, waving him over to just take it already. Once the 4 had finished splitting the loot, Doggo brought out a spherical object and announced he'd be testing their spiritual roots. He explained that choosing the right cultivation path was a lifelong matter, saying you couldn't afford to wing it. Doggo started with Little White Snake, asking her to place her tail on the crystal sphere first. Snaky gave her a gentle pat on the head and encouraged her to go ahead. Doggo explained that since she had a knack for alchemy, testing her affinity would be important, and further explained that if she could master pill refining, then that would be a massive win for the team. The moment her tail touched the crystal, a vibrant green light erupted, flooding the entire cave in a rich emerald glow. Doggo stood there in shock, noting it was a pure, highest-grade wood spiritual root, which meant she was born an alchemy prodigy. Exclaiming in disbelief, Doggo declared that even among humans, this kind of innate gift was 1 in a million. Because of that, any major sect would fight to take her in. Pulling Snaky aside, Doggo grinned and commented that he was seriously blessed. Not only would they never have to worry about pills again, but in the human world, a girl with a single wood root would usually grow up to be breathtakingly beautiful. Remarking further, he added that if she managed to take on human form one day, she'd likely leave male cultivators swooning wherever she went. Turning to her again, Snaky handed her a pile of jade slips filled with wood-based techniques and alchemy knowledge. But just as he was done, Little White Snake gently grabbed his tail. Looking a bit shy, she asked if she should start calling him my king, darling, or husband. Snaky was shocked by the question. Turning toward Doggo, he asked what kind of nonsense memories he'd been planting in her mind. Doggo just shrugged, saying it was standard human stuff. Nothing weird about it. He even pointed out that they'd technically already done the deed before Snaky gained intelligence. Wolfie, not missing a beat, chimed in that husband sounded the most gentle and affectionate, which earned him a glare from Snaky. Little White Snake rubbed up against Snaky and whispered husband in a soft voice, making him nearly lose his composure. Flustered, he quickly asked her to just call him by his name from now on. She nodded eagerly, but mentioned she'd like a name too, one that matched his. Asking if she could be called Snowy, she looked up with hopeful eyes, leaving Snaky no choice but to agree instantly. Now that everyone had names, they figured it was time to think about surnames too. Wolfie suggested he'd take the same surname as Snaky, but Doggo cut in, saying it'd make more sense if Wolfie followed his. Next up was Wolfie's test. When the crystal flashed with 3 colors, he cheered that he had triple root talent. Doggo, however, remarked dryly that it was a mess of gold, fire, and water, technically a mixed triple root, but one with terrible compatibility. He explained that more roots generally meant lower quality, which hit Wolfie like a punch to the gut. Finally, it was Snaky's turn. He couldn't wait, eagerly slapping his tail onto the sphere. Instantly, the crystal lit up in a dazzling rainbow of colors. "Why are there so many colors?" Snaky asked, looking all confused. But the light grew brighter, then shot upward like a pillar. "Whoa, this thing's intense!" Wolfie shouted. Doggo quickly warned Snaky to take his tail off, saying the sphere was on the verge of shattering. Everyone scrambled back, and Snaky looked at the results in disbelief. Seeing that it was 7 roots, he wondered if his aptitude was worse than Wolfie's. Wolfie, a bit hurt, murmured that he still had some dignity too. Thank you very much. Ignoring his protest, Doggo disagreed and further explained that while Snaky's roots were varied and messy, the individual quality was ridiculously high, especially his earth root, and words just can't explain how great it is. Studying the crystal carefully, Doggo remarked that he'd never seen a case like this before. But thinking back on Snaky's absurd learning speed, it all made sense. Snaky, taking it in stride, declared that if Earth was his strongest root, he'd specialize in Earth-based techniques moving forward. Last up was Doggo himself. The crystal turned purple the moment he touched it, and he wasn't surprised. Snaky asked if that meant he had no spiritual root, or maybe a dark root. Doggo glanced at him, then suddenly grinned, hearing Snaky calling it the dark root, chuckling that it actually sounded kind of cool. He announced he'd be keeping that name from now on. Then, out of nowhere, he mentioned that part of his old power had returned. He decided it was time to enter seclusion for a bit and work on a breakthrough, and he tells them to keep an eye on defense and supplies. Snaky replied that they still had plenty of food stored in the pouch, and as long as no foundation-level cultivators showed up, defense shouldn't be a problem either. We fast forward to a month later. During this time, Snaky had buried himself in mastering earth-based techniques. He picked up earthen spikes and earth wall, one offensive, one defensive. But right now, he was curious about their power, so he tested them against each other. When the spikes pierced straight through the wall, he concluded that earthen spikes clearly packed more punch. He then tried out heavy earth armor. Almost instantly, a solid casing formed around his body. With that layered on top of earth wall, his defense saw a massive boost. According to what he'd learned, there were 16 known earth-type techniques, and though he'd only mastered 3 so far, he figured that even if he couldn't beat a foundation-level cultivator, he'd at least be able to run. Still, while mastering all these techniques, his cultivation hadn't moved much at all. He sighed at the thought. Most of the pills and high-tier beast meat were gone, and progress was stalling. Thankfully, Snowy had started studying alchemy. Though she seemed full of confidence, the results were questionable at best. The scary-looking mess in the jar she produced from a pile of good herbs had Snaky more than a little concerned. And with him outside training, Wolfie just happened to be the test subject. Inside the cave, Wolfie was curled up in the corner, shrinking back as Snowy called out his name with a big smile and a pitch-black pill in her hand, which she cheerfully insisted he give it a try. The poor wolf let out a desperate yelp and collapsed immediately after taking it. Foam bubbled from his mouth as he gasped, barely managing to croak that the pill was poisoned. Snaky stood frozen, horrified, wondering if this was really the work of a so-called alchemy prodigy. After a moment, he decided it'd be best to go hunt down some proper spirit beasts himself. Soon after, he arrived in a massive plain. There, he spotted a herd of massive woolly mammoths, and his eyes practically lit up. Even the weakest among them, excluding calves and pregnant females, were third-level spirit beasts. For Snaky, any one of them could feed him for days. But what really caught his attention was the leader, and the big fellow surely looks terrifying. That one, he noted, would be a massive power-up if eaten. Just as he was planning his move, footsteps echoed from behind. Snaky turned and spotted a group of human cultivators approaching. Leading them was one of Xuanyangzi's personal disciples, already at the early Foundation establishment. Snaky guessed they were probably snake hunters from the Xiaoyao sect. What? He thought. Even elephants aren't safe from these guys. Wanting to avoid conflict, he decided to send out a puppet to observe from a safe distance. Down below, one of the disciples grinned, thrilled by their discovery. He remarked that it really showed the skill of their leader, saying he's worthy of being a personal disciple. The young man nodded proudly, responding that it was only natural. Their eyes gleamed with greed as they stared at the mammoth's tusks. Sensing danger, the female mammoth quickly huddled around their calves. The herd let out a unified roar, but the human clearly didn't care. One of them even joked about turning the tusks into gifts for their favorite girls at the Purple Cloud sect, saying that it'd make dual cultivation an easy win. Before he could finish his sentence, the mammoth leader charged. They reacted quickly, dodging with ease, but the leader's strength didn't go unnoticed. They confirmed that this one had to be the alpha. The young man immediately began barking orders, directing the others to set up a formation. They scattered, each dropping spirit stones in formation. A faint light dome began to take shape, trapping the entire herd. The mammoth tried desperately to break free, but the young man just laughed at what he called their pointless struggle. Drawing a long spear, he stabbed forward, injuring one of them. Snaky was shocked to see the human even going after one of the calves. That, Snaky decided, was too much. The mammoth leader lunged in to shield the baby with its own body, and in the blink of an eye, Blood sprayed across the clearing. Snaky couldn't watch any longer. Saying these human cultivators clearly weren't just hunting, they were trying to wipe out the entire herd. He told himself he had to do something, at least to protect the pregnant mothers and the calves. Otherwise, there'd be nothing left to eat in the future. Still, he knew better than to charge in blindly. Snake hunters had numbers and strength. One wrong move, and he wouldn't be able to protect himself, let alone the herd. So he decided to bide his time, searching for the right opening. The leader continued ramming the formation barrier, even when its body bloodied and broken. But not once did it hesitate. The young cultivator remarked that brute force wasn't working and wondered if trickery might be more effective. Just then, one of his men reported that the formation was starting to give way. Alarmed, the young man called out to the mammoth leader, shouting that if it could understand him, surrendering its tusks might earn them a chance to live. He even argued that the calves' safety was at stake, but the leader just gave a low snort, almost like he was smirking. Then, together with a few of the other male mammoths, it charged the weakened section of the barrier and broke through. The moment the gap opened, the mothers and their calves bolted. The young man's expression darkened. With a sharp flick of his hand, he threw a flying sword at one of the fleeing females. But before it could land, the leader's trunk lashed out and knocked it away. Staring at the battered beast, the young cultivator could still see the mocking look in its eyes. Enraged, he ordered 3 men to give chase, while the rest stayed behind to finish off the herd. Watching from a distance, Snaky tracked the 3 who split off. One was at 9th level chi refining, the other 2 at 6th. Now's the chance, he thought, and quickly sank underground using his earth escape, and decided to deal with these 3 first. Up ahead, one of the calves stumbled. The little one was exhausted, and the mother tried desperately to push it forward, but the humans were catching up fast. One of them laughed cruelly, drawing his weapon as he closed in for the kill. Just as he leapt into the air to strike, Snaky emerged from a nearby boulder. Without hesitation, he fired an earthen spike. It pierced through the man's torso before he even knew what hit him. The other 2 froze, instantly realizing they weren't alone. Without waiting, they turned and ran. But Snaky had already anticipated that. Up above, one of his bird puppets tracked their movement from the sky. The 2 attempted to escape, hoping to return with reinforcements, but they were already walking into an ambush. Hidden in the trees, one of Snaky's lizard puppets fired a beam of light, hitting one of them square in the leg and sending him tumbling. The other turned around just in time to see a flurry of glowing shots heading their way. The puppet lizards attacked in unison, and in a flash, both of them were blasted to pieces. One of them was still barely breathing, only to realize in horror that yet another puppet had crawled up beside him. Snaky walked over calmly, collected their storage pouches, and then coldly muttered that they had it coming. After looting the bodies, they noted how the herd had escaped. He decided to stay hidden a little longer. Maybe he'd catch another straggler. Picking up a human tooth from the ground, Snaky just can't believe they went through all that trouble for something so pointless, then calls them a bunch of idiots. Meanwhile, on the other side, the battle had drawn to a close. The male mammoth lies defeated in a pool of blood. The young cultivator sits on its body looking more annoyed than impressed, while the others gasp about how huge the tusks are. He, however, couldn't care less about the size of the tusk. What really bugs him is why those 3 fools haven't returned yet, so he orders someone to check. The man nods, runs toward the other side. Meanwhile, he pulls out the spear and silently wonders if those 3 ran off with the loot. But not long after, a scream cuts through the air, and an earthen spike had pierced straight through the man's body. The guy snaps, sending out his spiritual sense to demand who's behind this. Meanwhile, hiding underground, Snaky chews on beast meat, quietly noting that this guy's spiritual sense barely reaches 300 meters, saying it's way weaker than that of the other cultivator he met before. He can't tell if the man's actually weak or just pretending, but either way he had to be a bit cautious. After some furious yelling, the man flings a handful of strange sand, trying to locate the assailant. Instantly, the others wrap themselves in spiritual energy, raising their defenses. At the same time, 2 injured mammoths seize the chance and flee. They can only watch because they've got bigger problems now. Not far away, a lizard puppet creeps closer. Snaky grins to himself, planning a little distraction. The man quickly spots it and throws his spear, only to realize too late that it's just a puppet. Realizing he's been played, he boils with rage. Snaky takes his chance. With a deep rumble, several earthen spikes shoot up, too fast to dodge completely. Even though the cultivators had been prepared, some are still skewered. The young man finally catches on, saying it's all a diversion. He roars in frustration, shouting, daring Snaky to fight him face to face. But Snaky just thinks he's an idiot. Why fight head-on when he can just kill them like this? All of a sudden, the ground trembles, and a disciple suddenly bursts into flames. The man freezes, and a bead of sweat rolls down his forehead. A thunderous voice demands to know if it was they who dared to go after his offspring. A colossal figure stomps forward. Each step shakes the ground. It turned out to be a woolly mammoth chief named Manjin, who's already a peak Foundation establishment. The young cultivator knows he's outmatched, so he turns to flee, but the big fellow chases after him on a chunk of cloud. Snaky gasps in surprise, admitting he had never seen a beast this strong before, and he thinks it's kinda cool how he can do all that. He pokes his little head out, quietly sending his puppets to scoop up all the humans' storage bags. While doing that, he notices the mammoth chief isn't exactly fast, but the cultivator is sprinting like his life depends on it. So, Snaky decides to help the big fella out. A spike bursts from the ground in front of the fleeing man. The guy dodges at the last second, hurling curses at whoever he calls the rat hiding in the shadows. The mammoth chief notices someone is helping him, although he's not sure who's helping, but he silently remembers the favor. One massive step later, the beast stomps down. The young man tries to fight back, unleashing his strongest techniques, but the mammoth's power crushes through them. He barely survives the impact, but knows the next hit will be his last. Desperate, he pulls out his reincarnation pendant. Watching from a safe distance, Snaky decides it's best not to get too involved in battles like this, as his bird puppet snatches another storage bag, all the while noting that most of the male mammoths are already dead, saying this was a total massacre. Then he spots the leader from earlier, barely breathing. Snaky peeks out again. The leader sees him too, but is too weak to move. Snaky mutters a soft promise not to eat him. After all, he's already helped this much, so why stop now? He takes out a healing pill and pushes it toward the mammoth, figuring a little goodwill never hurts. Not long after, Big Fellow flies back. The moment he spots his kid struggling to get up, his eyes light up with joy. He hurries over, pulls the spear out of the mammoth's body, and gently tells him to stay still. When his gaze falls on the scattered empty bottles, and he recalls the earthen spike from earlier, everything suddenly clicks in his mind. Overcome with emotion, Big Fellow drops to his knees, his voice echoing across the forest as he shouts his gratitude. He declares that the savior who protected his kin has his eternal thanks, begging the person to show themselves. Feeling the ground tremble, Snaky tilts his little head and decides, yeah, maybe it's better to just leave, because if they're this thankful, it'd feel awkward to eat them later. So, like a true mystery hero, he chooses to vanish quietly. Still, he has to admit, the big fella is terrifyingly strong. It didn't even take him long to crush that Foundation establishment cultivator, and since most demonic beasts don't bother erasing the spiritual imprint on human storage bags, well, let's just say collecting their loot suddenly sounds like a pretty good idea. But he forces himself to calm down, worried that the human might be faking his death. So, again, it's best to keep it safe. 3 days had passed. Suddenly, the young man's corpse twitches. A green energy wraps around his body, lifting him from the ground. His flesh slowly rebuilds itself, and it's taken 3 whole days. Thank the heavens he'd activated his reincarnation pendant in time. Not far away, a phantom appears. Turns out to be his master. The young man, still weak, reports everything, asking if the enemy has shown up. His master, Xuan Yangzi, calmly explains it's been 3 days with no sign of the attacker. He even gives the hidden enemy a 9 out of 10 for cunning. As for his disciple's composure, it was a big fat 0. Still, seeing his injuries, he decides to send him back to the Purple Cloud sect to recover. Meanwhile, deep in a cave, energy surges upward. Unfortunately, Snaky's attempt to break through fails. Sure, the loot helped him reach the peak of level 7, but Foundation establishment still feels far away. He stuffs the fish that got blown up into his mouth without a second thought. Then he thought about the mammoth, thinking to himself that once he reaches that level, maybe he too could flow on the clouds, and he wonders what kind of changes his body will undergo when that day comes. Suddenly, a loud explosion rocks the cave. Doggo stumbles out, pitch black from head to toe, cursing whoever convinced her to learn alchemy. Hearing the question, they all looked at him, and at the same time, they said it was his own idea. After all, she was the one bragging that Snowy had a natural talent for alchemy, and to be fair, Snowy does have a pure wood spirit root. But somehow, every single time she touches a furnace, the thing explodes. Wolfie argues that she did succeed once, and he even tried the pill, but the thing ended up being poisonous. Doggo rolls his eyes and reminds him that the only reason he's still alive is because she undercooked it. Snowy, hugging the furnace like a wounded kitten, insists she succeeded this time. Doggo was shocked, then snatched the pill, took a whiff, and gulped nervously. It surely looks like a pill, but smells like something else entirely, but he can't tell what was wrong about it. Snowy proudly claims it's a minor essence pill she was asked to make. Snaky squints at it, but honestly isn't sure if this is actually it. The smell alone feels suspicious. Doggo, however, thinks that since Snaky made her refine it, he should be the one to test it. Snakey fires back with some sarcasm, saying Doggo is the one teaching her, so he should have the honor, and before long they're both bickering like kids. Snowy, misreading the entire situation, beams with pride and offers to make another so they don't have to fight over it. The other two reject that idea in perfect unison. Then, as if struck by the same idea at the same time, they both think of someone else. However, Wolfie already senses trouble and bolts, declaring he's slow, not stupid. So, naturally, they decide to catch a few demon beasts for testing. So, a poor fish and an unlucky monkey, level 2 and level 3 respectively, become the guinea pigs. Doggo scrapes off a tiny bit of powder and feeds it to the fish. Almost immediately, power explodes from its body, instantly becoming level 3, then 4, and still climbing. Everyone freezes. Even Snakey is impressed, saying this is just a little powder, not the whole pill. Doggo was amazed and commented that she's indeed a prodigy. Snowy's face lights up hearing the compliment. But before they can celebrate too much, something goes very, very wrong. And in the next scene, the fish somehow grows a pair of legs. Snakey blurts out that it's evolving. Doggo yells back that this isn't evolution. It's a full-blown mutation, and the thing kinda just bolts away out of the cave. Luckily, they still had a monkey left. Unfortunately, the poor thing was so terrified that it fainted on the spot. But mercy wasn't part of their plan. They shoved the entire leftover pill straight into its mouth, and once again, raw power exploded out like a storm. What happened next was way beyond Snakey's tiny snake brain could comprehend. Honestly, just looking at it said everything. In seconds, the monkey beast smashed through 5 whole levels, blinking its way straight to level 8, and that wasn't even the main point. Snakey pointed this out in disbelief, but Doggo, of course, focused on something entirely different, like the fact that the monkey had just turned into a human. Then, without warning, the freshly evolved monkey face-planted on the ground, and everything went silent. Doggo summed it up like a doctor announcing the obvious, saying the poor thing died of too much energy. Snakey flinched, hearing that, and Snowy gasped and rushed to apologize, saying she didn't know it could actually kill someone. Snakey slithered over, patting her head in what could generously be called comfort. After all, the two beasts were supposed to be dinner anyway. Still, Doggo couldn't shake off the confusion. Everything about the process was correct. The ingredients, the refining method, and the steps. So why was the result so over the top? He sniffed around, frowning, and noted the way the monkey died felt oddly familiar. Then, Snakey notes a strange smell. He tilted his head and leaned closer to Snowy, sniffing, which made her blush, asking if there was something wrong with her. Snakey muttered that she smells kinda nice, but there's something weird about her aura. He suddenly asked what cultivation technique she practiced. Doggo froze mid-breath, as if struck by lightning. Snowy thought about it for a second and said it was called Heavenly Demon Technique. And just like that, everything clicked. Doggo remembered that back then, before their departure, when he gave her and Wolfie some of his energy in the hope of opening up their intelligence. He forgot about this part. That being said, this very technique was only meant for someone like him, with a demonic physique to practice, and not someone with a pure wood spirit root. No wonder everything kept exploding. He immediately tells Snowy to circulate her energy, while Snakey wisely slithered back a few meters. A second later, a thick swirl of purple energy wrapped itself around sharp thorns. It was a surprise to see that both could actually fuse, and this clearly explained why the pills had turned out so freaky. Snowy quietly asked if she could still learn alchemy. Doggo shot her a firm no, but Snakey, seeing the tears welling up in her eyes, couldn't bring himself to be so harsh. He wiped her cheeks gently and tells her to keep trying. Worst case, they'd just catch more test subjects and believe one day she could surely succeed. Then, like a real teammate, he dumped a pile of furnaces and herbs from his storage bag on the ground. Snowy's heart instantly melted, and she softly called him darling, twining around him like a clingy vine. Snakey, startled, insisted she calm down. Of course, Doggo wasn't about to let the moment slide. From behind, he snickered, reminding Snakey not to waste the pills she'd worked so hard to refine in the future. By midnight, Snowy was finally soothed. Doggo leaned forward with a grin, claiming he had a way to get enough minor essence pills to push Snakey all the way to peak level, and maybe, just maybe, break through Foundation establishment. For a moment, Snakey imagined himself flying through the clouds, asking if he could actually do that. But Doggo ruined the fantasy with a casual shake of the head and tells him to stop dreaming. Snakey rolled his eyes but still wondered how the big fellow happened to do it. Either way, that wasn't the main problem right now. The real question was, what's next? Doggo already had a plan. He whipped out an entire layout of the purple cloud sect and pointed towards the alchemy chamber with his tiny paws. He asked if Snaky had the guts to rob it. But when it comes to cultivation, he's more than willing to take some risks. So with eyes gleaming with excitement, Snaky says, "Of course he did. As for the timing? Well, why wait? Because tonight sounded perfect."